Hello everyone and welcome back to the Unexplained Diaries. Here on this channel I share real-life encounters with beings from beyond the skies to help you unwind and drift off to sleep. Before we dive in, I would love to hear from you. Leave a comment and let me know where you're tuning in from. Now, find a comfortable spot, relax, and let's begin. I was flying home from a business trip one late September evening, just me and my little Cessna 172. The sky was mostly clear, with a cool breeze shaking the wings a bit, and I was cruising at about 5,500 feet over a stretch of farmland just outside Wichita, Kansas. The sun had dipped below the horizon maybe 20 minutes earlier, leaving behind that weird in-between light. Dusk, but not quite dark yet. I'd done this flight 100 times before, but that night, something was off. It started when I noticed something in my peripheral vision, just above the cornfields to my right. At first, I thought it was another plane or maybe a drone, but as I looked closer, it didn't make any sense. The object was metallic, bright enough to reflect the last light of day, but it wasn't shaped like anything I'd seen in the sky. It was almost disc-like, but more angular, kind of like a flattened diamond with rounded edges. No lights blinking, no sound, just this solid, reflective shape hanging in the air. I figured it might be some experimental military drone or something. They've been testing all kinds of stuff lately. But then, it did something that made me rethink everything. It moved. Not just a slow glide or a hover. It made a sharp, precise 90-degree turn to the left, with no visible acceleration or deceleration, like it was sliding through the air on rails. I mean, I fly small planes for a living. I know how physics works. There's no way something that size could do that, not without shaking itself apart. And yet, it did. I sat frozen for a few seconds, staring at it as it vanished behind a low ridge of trees. My brain scrambled to catch up, and then I did the only thing I could. I started following it. I adjusted my heading to keep it in sight, but when I popped up over the ridge, it was gone. No trail, no noise, nothing. Just empty sky. I glanced at my instruments. Everything was normal, no interference or glitches. The radio was quiet. I was alone in the cockpit, heart pounding, trying to convince myself I wasn't imagining it. The rest of the flight was uneventful, but my hands were shaking when I finally touched down at home airstrip just after 8. I shut down the engine and was about to get out when I saw the two men waiting beside my truck. They were dressed in black uniforms, the kind you'd expect military or government agents to wear, but there was no insignia or badge. Both looked serious and watched me without saying a word as I climbed down from the plane. I tried to break the silence first. "Can I help you?" One of them stepped forward and, without any introduction, asked, "Do you believe in physics or just experience?" I blinked, confused and caught off guard. "What do you mean?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, the other man pulled a small device out of his jacket. It looked like a plain black box with a screen and a few buttons, and started fiddling with it. I glanced over my shoulder at the runway, then back at the men. Something about their calm made me uneasy, but I told myself to stay cool. "I saw something strange up there," I said quietly. "A metallic object. It moved in a way that didn't make sense." The man with the device looked up, nodded slowly. "We know." There was a pause, and then the first man asked, "Did it seem like it was aware of you, watching?" I hesitated, trying to figure out if I was just projecting fear. "I don't know. It didn't make a sound or blink lights, but the way it turned, it felt deliberate." They exchanged a glance, then the second man spoke. "Things like that don't just happen by accident. You've seen something you shouldn't have." I wanted to ask what they meant, but the words stuck in my throat. Instead, I asked, "Who are you?" Neither answered. Instead, the first man said, "You'll hear from us again. Until then, keep your experience to yourself." That was it. No threats, no warnings, just a cold statement, and then they walked away, getting into a black SUV parked just off the runway. The vehicle had no plates. I stood there for a moment, watching the dust settle behind their tires, my mind racing. Over the next few days, nothing happened. I told only Lisa about it, and even then, I left out most details. The story sounded crazy when I said it out loud. But the strange part didn't end there. Every time I flew over that same patch of farmland, I felt like I was being watched. Sometimes I'd catch a glimpse of something reflective at the edge of the trees, but it always disappeared when I tried to get closer. Once, on a late flight home, my radio started crackling with static bursts, even though I was on a clear frequency. No words, just that low, buzzing noise. It lasted for maybe 30 seconds before cutting out completely. And the weirdest thing? My instruments were all fine, but my handheld GPS kept losing signal for a few seconds in that exact same area every time. I checked the plane over and over, no signs of damage or interference. Lisa started noticing it too. She said that when I came home from flying, I looked tense, like I was carrying something invisible. I don't think I was imagining any of it. A couple weeks later, I ran into Mr. Jenkins, an old pilot who used to fly crop dusters in the area. I told him about the object and the men in black, expecting a laugh or a shake of the head. Instead, he just nodded and said, "You're not the first. Folks have seen strange things around here for years, but no one talks about it." That made me feel a little better, like I wasn't losing it. I kept flying, but I stayed away from that airspace as much as possible. The men never contacted me again, and I didn't see them anywhere. But sometimes when I'm up there alone and the sun is setting just right, I catch that same gleam, that impossible turn in the corner of my eye. And I wonder what they're really watching, and if they're still watching me. I was out in the field, late September, working on a project about nocturnal animal behavior in the forests near Ashland, Oregon. I'm Jen Marshall, a wildlife biologist, and my focus that season was tracking owl and bat movements. I'd set up a small trailer on the edge of a clearing where we'd tagged some animals, and I spent most nights there, watching and recording. One night, around 11 p.m., I stepped outside the trailer to check some motion sensors near the tree line. It was a cool night, the kind that smells like pine needles and damp earth. The air was still, no wind, no rustling in the leaves except the usual night sounds. As I scanned the treetops with a flashlight, I noticed something odd. A faint glow above the trees, about 100 feet up. At first, I thought it was a drone or a small helicopter, but there was no sound. Not a buzz, no rotor noise, nothing. Just this quiet, steady light. It wasn't moving like a drone would either. It hovered in place just over the tree canopy, and the light was diffuse, kind of a pale white with a slight bluish tint. I stared for a minute, trying to convince myself it was some kind of aircraft I didn't recognize, but everything about it felt wrong. The silence was what got me. In all my years around wildlife and occasional low-flying planes, there's always noise. I pulled out my phone and tried to take a picture. But the camera wouldn't focus properly. The light kind of blurred on the screen like it was too bright or maybe interfering with the sensor. After a few shots, it just disappeared, vanished. 1 second it was there, the next, gone. I checked the motion sensors and cameras I had set up, hoping they caught something, but the footage was unremarkable. No signs of any aircraft or light. The forest looked normal. Even the owl calls and bat movements were the same as always. The next few nights I kept watching, but the light never came back. About a week later, 2 men showed up at my research trailer just after dusk. I was in the middle of cataloging some samples when I heard a knock on the door. I wasn't expecting anyone. When I opened it, 2 guys were standing there, both wearing dark suits and plain black coats. They didn't look official in the usual sense, no badges, no uniforms, but they had these laminated ID cards on chains around their necks. I asked who they were, but their names didn't match any agency I knew. One of them introduced himself as Agent Blake, the other as Agent Crane. They said they were with a federal wildlife compliance office, which I'd never heard of. They asked about anomalies in animal migration in my area, and if I'd noticed anything unusual in the last couple of weeks. I hesitated, thinking about the light. Should I tell them? I decided to be vague. "I haven't noticed anything out of the ordinary," I said. "The owls and bats are following their usual patterns." Agent Crane nodded slowly but didn't look convinced. Then Blake said, "We've been reviewing some data from your recent reports. Some of it seems imaginative. We're here to help get the records in order." They asked if they could look through my notes and raw data files. I said sure, though I felt uneasy. After about an hour, they packed up and left. But they left a sealed folder on my desk with the label "Corrected Data." I opened it later, Inside were printed pages of what looked like my own reports, but the numbers and observations were different, subtly changed. The movement patterns looked more consistent, less erratic, with some details missing that I knew were there. I tried calling the agency names they'd given me, but none of the phone numbers worked. I asked around, and no one seemed to know anything about those men or that office. Over the next few days, I noticed more weird things. The animals I'd been tracking started behaving oddly. One morning, I found a dozen bird carcasses under a roost, all of them with no visible injuries, just dead. The bats stopped coming out altogether. I tried to report it, but the local wildlife center said there hadn't been any similar reports. Sometimes when I walked near the tree line at night, I'd catch glimpses of shadows moving just out of sight, but nothing concrete. I couldn't tell if it was animals or something else. One night I heard a low hum, like a distant engine, but when I looked up, the sky was clear, no planes or helicopters. My phone started glitching, with static sounds on calls and strange interference on my camera. Then my laptop died, just completely bricked itself the day after the men came. I tried to get back to my work, but every time I felt like I was getting close to something important, there was interference. Data would disappear. Notes I'd made would vanish from files. The men never came back, but I kept finding traces of them, like that folder, or hearing people mention a compliance check for wildlife research that no one else seemed to have heard of. I moved the trailer a few miles away and stopped fieldwork for a while. The forest felt different after that night with the light. Like something had shifted, but I couldn't say what. I still go out sometimes to look up at the trees, but I don't expect to see anything. Just the normal night sounds and the occasional owl. That's it. No flash or boom, no obvious craft or beings, just a quiet light, and two men who didn't quite belong, and a forest that doesn't behave like it used to. I'd planned that weekend hike for weeks. I needed to clear my head, get away from the city noise and deadlines. I'm Mark Reynolds, 35, and I live in Portland, but I spend a lot of time exploring the more remote parts of Oregon whenever I can. This time, I chose a trail near an old Cold War radar station up by the Cascades, not exactly a tourist spot, mostly forgotten except by the locals and a few hikers like me. It was late October, and the weather had turned cold and damp. The first evening I got there, I set up camp just past the tree line, not far from where the radar installation used to operate. Most of the concrete and metal was gone, just ruins left behind. But you could still see the foundation slabs and a few rusted antenna pieces sticking up. I was settling in around 7 p.m. when this low, deep hum started. It wasn't like any engine or animal I knew. It was constant, like a sound vibrating through the ground and air at the same time. I stopped what I was doing and listened. It was coming from just beyond the tree line. I grabbed my flashlight and headed toward the edge, trying to see what could be making that noise. That's when I noticed the lights. Not normal ones. These were small, moving slowly just beneath the trees, flickering faintly. They weren't like flashlights or lanterns, more like pale, bluish orbs, gliding around quietly in the shadows. I squinted, but the darkness and the dense forest made it hard to tell how many lights there were or what was making them move. They didn't look like people or animals, at least not anything familiar. I backed away quietly and returned to my camp, keeping my phone ready, but not wanting to make noise. I told myself it was probably some weird kind of drone or a research team running tests, but there was no sound or chatter. Just that hum, low and unchanging. I slept uneasily, waking several times to check the sounds, but nothing else happened that night. The next day, I decided to hike further up the trail to see if I could find more signs of activity. The forest was quiet, except for the usual rustle of leaves and distant bird calls. I didn't see anything unusual. That evening, back at my cabin, which was a small, rented place about 10 miles from the trailhead, I sat outside watching the stars. It was clear and cold. Then I noticed headlights moving down the road nearby. A black sedan, maybe a late model, passed slowly. I didn't think much of it at first. People sometimes drove out here late. But then I realized the headlights were off. Completely dark. I blinked, thinking I was mistaken. But no, the car was driving with no lights on. It passed my cabin slowly, never speeding up or slowing down, just a steady pace. Then about an hour later, it came back, again with no lights. This continued for the next 2 nights. Exactly every hour on the dot, that same black car drove past my cabin, always without headlights, never slowing down or stopping. I tried to flag it down the first time, flashing my flashlight, but it didn't react. No brake lights, no signals, nothing. Just the same steady drive. The whole thing felt wrong, like a scene out of a movie. I even checked if there was something wrong with the road's power lines or if there was a nearby power outage, but everything else had lights. After the third night, I mentioned the car to a local guy at a diner back in town. He gave me a weird look and said, "You sure it wasn't just a truck or something?" I told him about the no headlights and the strict hourly timing. He shrugged and said, "Around here, some folks keep an eye on that place. You never know." I didn't press him for details. That same night, after the car drove by again, I heard that hum again outside the cabin. It was faint, like it was far away, but still there. I stood by the window, watching the dark forest line beyond the road, but I couldn't see anything. The next day, I tried to hike back to the radar site during daylight. The forest felt heavier, like the air was thicker. I kept looking for those strange lights, but I didn't see any. When I got back to the site, I noticed something odd. Some of the old concrete slabs looked freshly cracked, like something heavy had pressed down on them recently. I took pictures, but didn't know what to make of it. That night, I decided to pack up and leave early the next morning. The sense of being watched was getting stronger. Before I went to bed, I double-checked all the locks on the cabin doors and windows. I felt uneasy, like someone or something was lingering nearby. Just after midnight, I woke to that hum again, louder this time. It vibrated through the walls and floor, low and steady. I looked outside. The black car was back, but this time it stopped across the street, engine off, no lights on. It just sat there. I watched for what felt like forever, my heart racing. Then the car's door opened, and a figure stepped out. I couldn't see any details, dark clothes, standing perfectly still. After a minute, the figure got back into the car, which started moving again, still no lights, and drove off. I didn't sleep after that. The next morning, I packed my things quickly and left. I told myself it was nothing, maybe some weird local prank or surveillance, but I kept thinking about the hum, the lights beneath the trees, and that silent car. Since then, I haven't been back near that area. Sometimes late at night, I think I still hear that low hum when the wind blows just right. I don't know what it was or who was driving that car. It's been weeks now, and I'm still not sure if any of it actually happened the way I remember, but it did. That much I know. It happened on my way home from a work trip. I'd been driving back to Little Rock from a client meeting in Minna, Arkansas. It's a 3-hour drive, give or take, depending on how much you want to mess with the back roads. I left just after dinner around 7 p.m., trying to beat the fog that usually creeps in around midnight that time of year. About halfway, somewhere near Forsh Mountain, my GPS had me take a weird detour. It was supposed to cut off a few minutes by skipping a construction area near Ola. I didn't think much of it, just another winding rural road lined with pine trees and utility poles every few miles. Not a single other car for at least 30 minutes. I was about to turn the radio back on when I saw the tower. It was off to the left, just beyond the tree line. One of those old red and white striped radio towers with a blinking beacon on top. Nothing strange about it. Arkansas has hundreds of those scattered around. But something about this one gave me pause. It was too quiet. Not even bugs or tree frogs, which is weird for late September. Then the engine started acting up. It didn't stall exactly, it just kind of softened. Like the RPMs dropped and stayed low even as I pressed the gas. The headlights dimmed, the dashboard lights flickered once. That's when I noticed the radio tower's beacon wasn't blinking anymore. It was lit but steady, just a solid red glow on top, no pulse. And then I saw it. There was something above it. Not directly over the light, but floating maybe 50 feet higher and off to one side. I wouldn't have seen it if I hadn't been staring. No lights, no reflection, just this huge, dark shape, like an overturned dinner plate. Not spinning, not wobbling, just hanging there, perfectly still. I slowed to a crawl halfway off the road now and turned down the radio, except the radio was already off. Static. The screen was on, but it wasn't reading anything. No signal, no clock, just blank numbers and white noise. Then the engine cut completely. No sputter, no warning, just dead. I sat there with the key still turned, foot on the brake, unsure what to do. The cabin light came on by itself. The AC blew hot for half a second even though it had been set to cool. My hands were shaking, but I didn't feel cold. I didn't feel anything, really. It was like my senses were lagging. I turned the key again. Nothing. Not even a click. I looked back at the tower. The red light had gone out. The thing was still there, still floating, dark against the sky. I couldn't make out any details, just the shape. A little wider than the tower's top platform and maybe half as tall. No sound at all, even though it was close enough. I should have heard something. A motor, a hum, anything. Then it moved. It didn't rotate or tilt. It just slid sideways, maybe 20 feet, and then down behind the trees, like it was sinking into the forest. It didn't bounce or lurch, just smooth, controlled movement, as if gravity didn't apply. Once it disappeared, the red beacon blinked on again, just once. Then the radio came back to life, cutting in mid-song like someone unpaused it. The headlights brightened. I turned the key again, and the engine started right up, no issue. I didn't stick around. I floored it, fishtailed a little on the shoulder, and sped back onto the main road. My hands didn't stop shaking until I hit Dardanelle. I got home late, around 12:30 a.m. I didn't tell anyone. Not my boss, not my roommate, not my parents. I didn't even write it down. I figured maybe I was tired. Maybe the car just had a hiccup and the thing in the sky was a trick of the light. I kept telling myself that all night. Next morning, I was in the driveway brushing pine needles off the windshield when a black sedan pulled up across the street. Not a cop car. No decals or bars. Just a regular-looking Crown Vic with a small antenna and tinted windows. A man stepped out. White, mid-50s maybe, suit and tie. No badge, no clipboard. He walked up the driveway slow, like someone who's used to being let in. He stopped maybe 6 feet from me and smiled. I nodded before thinking. Yeah? He reached into his coat and pulled out a folded paper. I'm here to follow up on your vehicle malfunction. Last night, approximately 9:42 p.m., Highway 314 near the FM tower west of Hollis. My stomach dropped. I didn't say anything. I didn't know what to say. He unfolded the paper and held it out to me. It looked like some kind of waiver. Top of the page read Vehicle Malfunction Liability Release in all caps. Beneath that, a short paragraph in legal-sounding language. Something about acknowledging no damage was sustained and confirming I hadn't filed a formal complaint. At the bottom, my name was already printed next to a blank line. I hadn't told anyone. I hadn't even Googled the location. How did you, I started. The man just smiled again. Not friendly, just flat. No repairs necessary, correct? Vehicle's functional? I nodded, still not reaching for the paper. He tapped it once with his finger, Tegmising like urging me to sign. I didn't. He held the paper there for another few seconds, then folded it back up, returned it to his coat, and nodded like we'd finished a conversation. Thank you for your time. Then he walked back to the car, got in, and drove off. No license plate, or if there was one, it didn't have numbers I recognized. I looked for tire marks later. Nothing. No sign he'd even been there. The car's been fine ever since. No lights, no trouble starting. Radio works. I still drive that route for work sometimes. I've never the tower blink wrong again. Never seen that shape, but I never take the detour anymore. I'd parked up at Devil's Spine around 4:45 a.m. That stretch of cliff north of Bodega Bay, where the waves break clean before the wind picks up. I'd been going there a couple times a week since late March, trying to beat the crowds. Locals know about it, but it's out of the way enough that you don't run into many people, especially that early. That morning was dead quiet. Cold, even though the forecast said 60s. The air smelled off. Not rotten, exactly, but weirdly metallic. The tide was coming in slower than usual. I noticed it right away. The foam barely reached the usual markers on the rocks. My name's Evan, by the way. I'm 31, I work part-time at a hardware store in Santa Rosa, and I mostly keep to myself. Surfing's been the only thing I really care about since I moved here from inland. It calms my brain. Anyway, I slipped into my wetsuit, grabbed my board, and started down the trail. It's steep and narrow, and the last bit before the beach is just loose rock and seaweed. I usually stop halfway down to stretch and check the swells. This time, I didn't even make it that far. I just cleared the scrub line when I looked up and noticed the stars were gone. At first, I thought it was fog, marine layer rolling in, but it wasn't low like fog. It was up high, and it wasn't moving. It took me a second to really process it. The whole sky above the water, from maybe 30 degrees off the horizon to directly overhead, was just blank. No stars, not a single one. But the rest of the sky behind me, toward land, was still clear. You could see Orion, the Pleiades, everything. I kept blinking, trying to adjust, but it didn't help. The blank part wasn't dark, exactly. It just looked wrong, like someone had cut a chunk out of the sky. I remember crouching near this twisted little pine and just staring up with my board resting against my knees. I thought maybe it was smoke from a fire I hadn't heard about. Then I noticed the sound, or lack of it. Usually there's gulls, the crunch of the tide pulling against rock, wind in the grass. There was none of that. Just this weird pressure in my ears, like when a plane descends too fast. The water had gone completely still. Swells were gone, just flat, like glass. I've surfed that beach for 3 years. I've never seen it like that, not even during red tides. I felt this urge to get away from the edge. I didn't see anything move or hear anything come closer. It was more like a weight on my chest telling me to leave. I stood up fast, almost dropped my board, and climbed back to the van. The van's nothing special. A silver '06 Dodge with sand in the carpet and a busted sliding door I never lock. I got it for the sole purpose of early morning surf runs. When I crested the hill and saw it again, everything looked normal. No lights, no people around. I was still shaken, but I figured I'd just grab my phone, maybe call my buddy Darren and ask if he'd seen anything weird from Salmon Creek. I yanked open the driver's door and climbed in. There was a man sitting in the back seat. I froze. He was dead silent. Didn't move. Just sitting there, facing forward, hands resting flat on his knees. Black suit, black shirt, no tie. Pale skin, like paper. No visible hair, no glasses, no jewelry. Not young, not old. Somewhere in that blank middle space where you can't really guess. I couldn't speak. I just stared at him in the rearview mirror, breathing hard. I thought maybe I'd left the van unlocked and someone climbed in while I was down the path. But that didn't make sense. He hadn't been there before. Then he spoke. "Does the ocean ever show you things?" His voice was flat. Not robotic, but hollow, like there was nothing behind it. I didn't respond. I couldn't. My mouth wouldn't work. He turned his head just slightly toward me. Not all the way, just enough to let me know he was looking. "You're here often," he said. "You stay long enough, it shows you more." I managed to open my mouth finally, and all I said was, "What?" He didn't say anything else, just turned his head back forward and sat there. I couldn't bring myself to move. My keys were still in my hand. My board was wedged against the passenger seat. Every muscle in my legs was locked. I turned to face him directly. The moment my eyes left the mirror, he was gone. Just gone. No sound, no door opening, no shifting weight. The seat was empty. I flung the door open and scrambled out of the van, looked under it, around it. Nothing. The gravel wasn't disturbed. The grass around the lot hadn't been touched. It was like he'd blinked out of existence. I sat on the hood for 10, maybe 15 minutes, trying not to panic. I wasn't tired. I hadn't been drinking. I hadn't hit my head or taken anything weird. Everything had felt real. Too real. Eventually, I climbed back in and checked the rear view again. Empty. Just my crusty towel and a bag of fins. I drove home with the radio off. I didn't go back out there for 2 weeks. When I finally did, the beach looked normal. The water was choppy again. Birds were back, but the trail smelled faintly like copper, and I swear the waves broke about 10 feet further out than they used to. I haven't surfed there since June. I was driving home from my sister's place in Carson City, heading back to Bishop, California. I took the long way, US 395 south, since it's easier on the car than cutting through the hills, and I like driving at night anyway. Less traffic, no heat, and I can listen to whatever I want without thinking about time. It was late, maybe 11:45 p.m. on a Tuesday in March. Cold but dry, clear sky, no moon that I remember. The road was quiet, just long, open stretches between black hills and desert scrub. I was maybe 20 miles north of Bridgeport, alone on the highway, headlights stretching out into nothing, when I saw the light. At first, I thought it was a flare or maybe a low plane. Just this soft yellowish glow, maybe the size of a bus from my angle, drifting slowly above the ridgeline to the west. It wasn't flickering, it wasn't moving fast either. It kind of hovered, but not perfectly still, more like it pulsed gently as it floated sideways. Then it dropped behind the hill and disappeared. It wasn't dramatic. No noise, no beam of light or anything. It just sank behind the ridge and was gone. I slowed down. Not slammed the brakes or anything, just eased off the gas and pulled onto the shoulder. My first thought was maybe it was a crash, maybe some small aircraft or a weather balloon or something, but I hadn't heard any kind of impact. The engine idled, and I just sat there for a minute, trying to figure out if I should get out or keep driving. Then headlights appeared in my rear view. At first, they were far back, just two dim points bouncing on the highway, but they closed the gap fast. A black SUV, not lifted, not flashy, just plain black with deep tint and what looked like government plates. I didn't recognize the format, but they weren't California or Nevada standard. It pulled in behind me on the shoulder, maybe 15 feet back. No one got out. The engine stayed running, but the headlights cut off. I could still hear it idling, low and even, quieter than you'd expect for something that size. I thought maybe they were checking on me, maybe highway patrol or BLM or something. But no one came up to my window. 5 minutes passed, then 10. Still no one. I cracked my window a little. Cold air came in, but no sound except the engine behind me and my own. I adjusted my side mirror, tried to catch a glimpse of someone inside, but with the angle and tint, I couldn't see a thing. Just a dark blob where the driver should have been. Then the SUV pulled forward, slowly. It rolled up beside me and stopped, even with my driver's side window. I turned my head, expecting someone to motion or roll theirs down, but nothing happened. The window stayed shut. The interior lights didn't come on, just the sound of the engine idling. We sat like that for maybe 20 seconds. Then it drove off. No burst of speed, no rush, just smooth and steady down the highway until the taillights faded into the dark. I waited another minute before putting the car back in gear. I was still wired, but more confused than scared. The light over the hill had felt off, but the SUV was what made me uneasy. The rest of the drive was quiet. I got home around 1:30 a.m., pulled into my driveway, turned off the engine, and sat there a moment before heading inside. I live alone in a little rental outside town. Nothing fancy, just a 2-bedroom with a fenced-in yard and a cracked driveway. It backs up to a dry creek bed. I unlocked the front door and went in, turned on the kitchen light, fed the cat. Everything was normal. I was still kind of buzzing from the drive, so I poured a glass of water and sat on the couch, flipping through my phone even though I knew I wouldn't find anything helpful. Maybe 20 minutes passed. That's when the knock came. 3 quick taps, not loud, it wasn't the doorbell, just knuckles on glass. I froze for a second, trying to decide if I imagined it. Then it came again, same rhythm, tap, tap, tap. I walked to the front window and pulled back the curtain. No car in the driveway, no movement on the street. I flipped on the porch light and opened the door. No one there. But taped to the glass, dead center at eye level, was a black envelope. Matte finish, square corners, no markings. Just a piece of black tape holding it in place. I stood there a long time before pulling it off. It wasn't sealed, just folded shut. Inside was a single card. Heavy stock, like the kind you'd find in an expensive wedding invite. It was blank except for a short line of printed text in the center. Not everything drifts down. That was it. No name, no number, no explanation. I checked the street again. Nothing. Quiet. Even the porch light looked dimmer than usual. I stayed up the rest of the night. I didn't call anyone. What would I say? Next day, I checked the front camera. It's motion activated, sends a clip to my phone when someone's near the porch. The last alert it sent was from 8:17 p.m., hours before I got home. After that, nothing. Just a gap between then and sunrise. I didn't drive that route for a while. Still don't, unless I have to. I kept the envelope. It's in the drawer next to my bed. I never showed it to anyone. I didn't throw it out either. I worked as an air traffic controller at a small regional airport in northern Idaho for about 5 years. Nothing too fancy, mostly small private planes, occasional cargo flights, the usual quiet rhythm of a place that barely sees more than a handful of flights a day. The tower was old, barely updated, and I was the only controller on duty for most shifts. I liked the solitude, honestly. It let me zone out a bit, focus on the radio chatter and my screens. One evening, around 9:30 p.m., I noticed something weird on radar. This was back in early October, and the weather had been clear but chilly, a crisp fall night. The moon was out, but there was no cloud cover to explain what I was seeing. On the radar screen, way above the usual flight paths, something big was sitting still, not moving, just hovering over the range of mountains to the west of the airport. At first, I thought it was a glitch. I reset the radar, checked the power supply, even restarted the system. The dot stayed right where it was. I checked the flight schedule, the radar transponder list, called the FAA regional office to see if they had any notices of unusual traffic. Nothing. No flights reported, no military exercises, no helicopters, no drones. I kept watching it. The dot didn't move, didn't blink off. It was massive compared to the other blips from planes that flew through that airspace, but it made no radio calls, no transponder code, just there. I reported it on my routine logs, describing the object as an unidentified stationary radar contact, and sent the information up the chain of command. I thought maybe someone higher up would look into it. Later that night, around 11 p.m., the power flickered once, but the systems stayed up. I kept an eye on the radar, but the contact vanished sometime before midnight. I assumed it was a radar glitch or some interference. The next day was uneventful. I checked in with my supervisor over the phone. She sounded odd, like she was distracted, maybe even a little annoyed. She asked if I was sure about the report, then said the radar data wasn't showing anything unusual in that sector. That afternoon, I got a call from someone I didn't recognize. They said they were with a federal aviation agency and would be coming to the tower for a routine check. I wasn't told exactly when. Around 7 p.m., 3 men showed up at the airport entrance. They were dressed identically in black coats, simple button-up shirts, no ties. They looked older, maybe in their late 40s or early 50s, with short, graying hair. Their faces were neutral, almost like they were rehearsing being friendly. They flashed badges I'd never seen before. The badges looked official, but didn't match any federal or state agencies I was familiar with. I asked which agency they represented, but they gave vague answers, something about special aviation oversight. They asked to see the radar logs and recordings from the previous night. I showed them everything I had, the screen prints, my notes, the recordings from the radar system. They skimmed through it quietly, exchanging short comments in low voices I couldn't catch. Then one of them looked up at me and said, "You have a very imaginative writing style for a tower operator." His tone was polite, but there was something off about it, like a warning hidden behind the words. I asked if they needed anything else. They said they wanted to calibrate some equipment and requested access to the radar console for about 20 minutes. I figured, okay, fine, whatever they needed to do. While they were working, I stepped into the break room to get a drink. When I came back, they were gone. No goodbye, no note, nothing. I double-checked the door. It was locked from the inside, so they must have left through the main entrance. That's when I noticed the tower logbook was missing. The thick binder where I wrote down everything, flight plans, radio calls, incidents, including my report about the strange radar contact. Gone. I called my supervisor and the FAA office. They said they hadn't authorized anyone to come by or take the logs. The security cameras at the entrance were offline that evening, apparently due to some maintenance nobody had told me about. Over the next few days, I tried to get answers. The radar system didn't show anything like that contact again. My supervisor avoided the topic, acting like the whole thing was a mistake I'd made. I started checking the tower more carefully, looking for anything else missing or changed. The only thing I found was a faint smell, like ozone or burnt wires, near the radar console. I kept thinking about those men and their strange badges, their odd comments about my imaginative writing. I wondered if they were some kind of government inspectors or maybe something else entirely. I stayed at the airport a little longer after my shift ended that week, waiting to see if anyone else showed up. No one did. Eventually, I left the job. The whole experience left me uneasy, like someone had quietly rewritten the facts of what I'd seen. Sometimes, when I'm alone at night, I think about that dot on the radar, big, still, and unexplained, and the men who came to erase the record. I don't know what it was or who they were, but I know I wasn't imagining it. I was working the overnight shift at the weather station out by the Sangre de Cristo Mountains. My name's Jordan Mills, and I've been with the National Weather Service for about 5 years now, mostly doing remote monitoring and radar operations from small outposts like this one. This particular station sits on a ridge about 10 miles east of the mountain range itself, pretty isolated. Closest town is over an hour away, and the kind of place where if something weird happens, you're the only one around to see it. That night, it was late April, maybe around 10 p.m., and I was running my usual scan on the Doppler radar. The job is mostly routine, checking for precipitation, wind patterns, that kind of thing. But a few hours earlier, I'd noticed something strange on the screen. There was this huge stationary mass hovering over the northern part of the Sangre de Cristo range. At first, I figured it had to be a glitch or some sort of interference, but I kept watching. It wasn't moving, and it wasn't weather. No rain, no snow, just a dense, well-defined shape sitting there. I couldn't tell if it was cloud or something else. I tried adjusting the frequency and recalibrating the radar, but the shape stayed consistent, sharp-edged. It was unlike any formation I'd ever seen, Mike, and I've tracked everything from thunderstorms to dust devils in my time. It covered an area at least 5 miles across, too big to be a plane or bird flock, and it wasn't on any satellite images. Around midnight, the station's old landline phone rang. I almost didn't answer it. Calls this late were usually from dispatch or maintenance, but something about the ringing made me pick up. A man's voice came through, low and calm. "We need to come by your station. It's regarding the equipment." I asked who was calling, but the line went dead before he answered. No caller ID, no trace. I shrugged it off and went back to the radar feed, but I was uneasy. The thing on the screen hadn't changed at all. Around 1:30 a.m., there was a knock at the station's front door. I wasn't expecting anyone, and no visitors were allowed without clearance. I checked the security cameras. 2 men were standing outside. Both looked similar. Tall, mid-40s maybe, wearing identical black coats that looked too clean for a mountain outpost. Their hair was slicked back, and their expressions were unreadable. I hesitated, but opened the door a crack. "Good evening," one said evenly. "We're here to calibrate your radar." I told them I wasn't authorized to let anyone in, especially at this hour, but they showed some kind of badge. I couldn't make out the details, but it looked official. No logo I recognized, just an embossed seal. They didn't say much after that. I let them inside because arguing in the middle of nowhere felt pointless, especially when they seemed prepared to do this quickly. They moved straight to the radar console and started pressing buttons. I watched, trying to keep track of everything they did. It didn't look like standard calibration to me. They typed in sequences I didn't know, adjusted frequencies, and rerouted the data. They stayed quiet, except for the soft hum of the equipment. After about 20 minutes, they finished and packed up without a word. They gave me a nod, then left just like they came. No small talk, no questions. I locked the door behind them and tried to check the radar again. The huge stationary mass was gone. The rest of the night passed without incident, but something felt off. The air inside the station was stale, and the screens flickered a bit. I checked the system logs to see what they'd changed. That's when I realized the logs from the past 8 hours were missing, not deleted, just gone. The system acted like the data never existed. I double-checked the backup drives. Empty. Empty. I asked dispatch if they had records. They did, but nothing showed up for our station's radar during that time. When I called my supervisor the next morning to report what happened, he acted confused. Said no one authorized anyone to enter the station, and no one had seen any visitors on security feeds. I told him I'd seen them with my own eyes, but he told me to document it and move on. Later that day, I drove to town and grabbed coffee at the diner, trying to shake off the feeling. I mentioned the missing logs to a couple locals, but none had noticed anything unusual in the sky or around the mountains. I kept watching the radar after that night. No sign of the shape reappearing. The equipment worked fine, except for the missing logs. Sometimes late at night, I still check the skies toward the Sangre de Cristo range. The radar never shows anything like that again. But every once in a while, when the wind is calm and the air feels thick, I swear I hear that low hum again, like the station itself is remembering. It was early September, right after Labor Day weekend, and I'd taken a few days off work to avoid the crowds in the Adirondacks. I live about 3 hours south near Poughkeepsie, and I'd done this kind of solo hiking trip before. Drive up, camp for 2 nights, pack light, get off the grid a bit. I like the solitude. No service, no people, just trees and quiet. I parked at a trailhead near Indian Lake around 6:30 a.m. There was one other car there, a white Outback with Vermont plates, but no sign of anyone. The plan was to hike a loop that would take me about 6 hours round trip, depending on how often I stopped. Weather was cool, low 60s, but clear. No fog, no wind. Pretty much perfect. Nothing strange for the first few hours. I saw a few deer, heard woodpeckers, the usual. I stopped for lunch at a little ridge that overlooked a patch of dense trees to the north. Around 1:30 p.m., I packed up and kept walking. I was about 2/3 through the loop when I saw them. I don't know what else to call them except lights, red ones. 3 of them, maybe the size of a dime at arm's length, just flickering above the tree line to my left. Not in the sky exactly, more like just barely above the tallest trees. They weren't steady. They blinked, kind of rhythmically, but not in a pattern I recognized. I stopped walking and watched for a while. No sound, no movement in the trees, just the lights hovering maybe 100 yards out. I pulled out my phone and started recording. The lights were still there, still blinking. I zoomed in a bit, but the camera had trouble focusing through the trees. I remember lowering the phone and trying to squint at them with my own eyes. When I looked back at the screen, they were gone. I stood there another 5 minutes, maybe more, trying to catch them again. Nothing. I kept walking, and that should have been the end of it. But I felt off after that, like I wasn't alone anymore. I didn't hear anything weird, and I never saw another person, but every so often I'd stop and look behind me, convinced I'd heard footsteps just out of sync with mine. I told myself it was nerves or maybe an animal. Still, I picked up my pace. I got back to the trailhead just before 4 p.m. The white Outback was still there, exactly where it had been. No sign of its driver. I didn't think much of it at the time. I started the drive back south. The sun was still up, and I figured I'd make it most of the way home before dark. Around Shroon Lake, I noticed a black car behind me. Didn't catch the make, maybe a Dodge or a Lincoln. It had those deep tinted windows you can't see into, even in daylight. It wasn't tailgating, just keeping pace. When I sped up, it did too. When I slowed down, same thing. At first I thought it was a coincidence. We were both heading south on I-87, but after 30 minutes and 2 exits where I expected it to peel off, it was still there. No plates, just blank. I tried to get a better look by switching lanes, even took a random exit near Ticonderoga to see if they'd follow. They did. By then the sky was getting darker. I pulled into a small rest stop, not a real one with a building, just one of those pull-offs with a trash can and a picnic table. I parked and turned off my engine. The black car pulled into a few spots down. Nobody got out. I waited, watched the rearview mirror, heart hammering. 5 minutes passed, then 10. Eventually I started the car again, pulled back onto the highway. So did they. I kept driving for another hour. I passed Albany and started thinking about stopping for gas soon. The needle was low. I exited near a Sunoco station off Route 9, somewhere around Kinderhook. It was full dark by then. The black car pulled into the far end of the lot while I was filling up. Still no plates. Still just sitting there. I went inside to pay in cash, mostly so I could keep an eye on them through the windows. When I came back out, they were parked right next to my car. The driver's side window was down. The guy inside was maybe late 40s, clean-shaven, wearing a plain black ball cap and a zip-up hoodie. Not a word. He just held something out the window, a small black USB stick, and said, "Replace your footage with this." I didn't move, didn't say anything. He repeated it a little louder. "Replace your footage with this." He didn't look angry. He didn't smile either. Just flat. I took the USB stick. I don't know why. He rolled his window up, reversed out of the spot, and pulled back onto the road. I stood there holding it for a long time before I even got back in the car. I drove the rest of the way home without incident. No more black car, no one following. Just me, trying to figure out what the hell had happened. I didn't sleep that night. I plugged the USB into an old laptop the next morning, one I hadn't used in years. It was empty. No folders, just a single file labeled vid.mp4. It was 10 minutes long, but when I opened it, it was just static. Not like visual white noise either, just a gray screen, faint crackling in the background, and every few seconds this high-pitched tone like an old CRT TV powering up. That was it. Nothing else. I watched the whole thing, waiting for something to pop out. It never did. I never shared the footage I took on the hike. I didn't delete it, but when I went back to check it, the video wouldn't load. Just said, corrupt file. I tried copying it to my computer, tried renaming it, using different software. Nothing worked. The thumbnail was just black. A week later, I drove back up to Indian Lake. Not to hike, just to see if the white Outback was still there. It wasn't. But parked in the same spot was another black car. Different model, same no-plate situation. I didn't stop. I kept driving. That was last fall. I haven't been back since. We weren't looking for anything weird. Me and my buddy Greg were just out at his uncle's hunting cabin for the weekend. It's up in northern Minnesota, about a 40-minute drive from any town, tucked between a frozen lake and a long stretch of logging roads that don't get plowed in winter. The place has no Wi-Fi, no cell service, and no neighbors. Just a wood stove and a stack of firewood tall as the cabin itself. That's what we wanted. Quiet. We got there Friday evening, just after dark. It was February, probably 12 degrees out, but the sky was clear and packed with stars. We'd brought food, beer, and snowshoes. Plan was to stay 2 nights, do some hiking, maybe ice fish if we could dig out the gear. Saturday morning we took our time with coffee and eggs, then headed out around 11. There's a narrow trail that cuts east from the back of the property, goes through some thick birch and pine stands, past a collapsed shed on the left, and eventually climbs up a ridge. Greg said he remembered there used to be an old fire tower at the top, though last time he came up here was like 10 years ago. We packed light, brought a thermos and a couple granola bars, and set out with our snowshoes strapped to our boots. The snow was deep, but packed enough in spots that you didn't sink too much. It took us about 2 hours to reach the top of the ridge. It wasn't steep, just steady. We didn't talk a whole lot on the way up. Too quiet out there. Your own footsteps were loud. Even the trees didn't creak. When we got to the top, there it was, the fire tower. Still standing, somehow. Mostly rusted, wooden steps half rotted, but the frame looked intact, probably 40 feet tall. There was a faded no trespassing sign nailed to one of the supports, but it was so old it barely hung on. We didn't climb it, just stood there catching our breath, watching a few crows fly overhead. The sun was already low, even though it was barely 3:30. Everything had that bluish winter glow to it. That's when Greg noticed it. He tapped my arm and pointed out past the tree line to the west, just beyond the tower. Floating maybe 30-40 feet off the ground, there was this light. Not a plane, not a drone, just a soft white orb, about the size of a basketball. It didn't blink, didn't move, just hovered, dead still. We didn't say anything at first. I thought maybe it was the sun hitting some ice in the trees, but it was too far away for that and too high. Greg said, "That's not right." Real quiet. The weirdest part was how silent it was. There should have been wind that high up, or birds something, but it was dead silent. I pulled out my phone, but there was no signal. Tried to take a picture anyway, but the screen was all glitchy, like static bands flickering in and out. I've never seen it do that before. I looked up from the phone, and the orb had moved. Not fast, just a few feet higher and to the right. Still completely smooth, no sound. It stayed there for maybe another minute. Then it just blinked out. Not like it flew away. It just vanished. Greg swore under his breath and said we should head back. Neither of us wanted to admit how freaked out we were, but we were definitely walking faster on the way down. No talking. The woods felt wrong somehow, like we were being watched. That sounds dramatic, I know, but it's the best way I can describe it. It felt like something else was in the trees, matching our pace just far enough out that we couldn't see it. When we got back to the cabin, it was already dusk. We didn't even take our boots off right away. Just sat there in silence for a bit, then poured whiskey. Neither of us brought up what we saw until later that night after a few drinks. We kept going over it. Was it a drone? A flare? Some kind of weather thing? But none of it made sense. It moved too smoothly. It didn't flicker like a fire, and it made no noise at all. We barely slept that night. Every time I'd start to drift off, I'd think I heard crunching snow outside. I'd sit up, wait, then hear nothing. I didn't wake Greg. He was tossing around enough on his own. Next morning, we decided to head into town just to shake off the nerves a bit. There's a little store about 30 minutes away that sells jerky, propane, weird local crafts. We grabbed snacks and filled up the tank, tried to talk about normal stuff. When we got back to the cabin, that's when it happened. Greg's truck was parked in the same spot we left it, but there was a man sitting in the passenger seat, just sitting there like he'd been waiting for us. Black suit, black coat, no hat, pale skin, clean shaven, maybe mid-50s. Looked like a lawyer or a banker, except completely out of place in that setting. We both stopped walking, didn't say anything, just stared. He opened the passenger door and stepped out slowly, smiled, too wide, too long. Not fake exactly, just like someone copying how a smile is supposed to look. He said, "That wasn't meant for you." His voice was soft, clear, like he was talking right into our heads, even though he was standing 6 feet away. Greg asked, "Who are you?" The man just kept smiling. Then he shut the truck door and started walking into the woods. No coat, no gloves, no hat. Just walked straight into the trees like the cold didn't bother him. We didn't follow, just stood there frozen. After maybe 30 seconds, Greg opened the truck. Nothing looked touched, nothing missing, but the interior was warm, like someone had the heat running, but the keys were in Greg's pocket the whole time. We stayed one more night, barely spoke, didn't light a fire, just locked the doors and kept the blinds shut. I didn't even take off my boots. In the morning, we left early. Haven't been back since. Greg's uncle says we're welcome anytime, but we keep making excuses. I never even told anyone else about it, not really. What would I say? That we saw a floating light and a man in a suit who walked into the snow like it was nothing? I still don't know how he got into the truck. I was driving home from work the night it happened. I work second shift at a packaging plant just outside of Greensburg, Indiana, not far off I-74. It was around 12:40 a.m., maybe a little later. The roads were completely empty, which wasn't unusual. That stretch of CR 700E gets so quiet at night, you can drive for miles and never pass a single car. No street lights, either. Just long stretches of corn and soy fields, with the occasional mailbox at the end of a gravel drive. I was about 15 minutes from home, sipping the last of my gas station coffee, when I noticed the radio was cutting out. Not staticky, just dropping. Going silent for 2-3 seconds at a time, then popping back in mid-sentence. I thought it was the station, but I flipped through others, and they were doing it too. Then my headlights dimmed. Not all the way out, just down to maybe half brightness for a few seconds, then back up. That's when I slowed down. About a quarter mile ahead, off to the left side of the road, there was something in the air. Not a plane. It wasn't moving. It was just hanging above a cut field. There was a barn nearby, one of those old half-collapsed things with the rusted-out roof. I'd passed it 100 times before, but this thing, whatever it was low. Maybe 50 feet off the ground, maybe less. Big, too. The shape didn't click right away. It just looked like a mass blocking out the stars. No lights, no sound, just this black void in the sky. As I got closer, the shape became clearer. It was a triangle, like a long, flat wedge with soft, rounded corners. It was huge. I couldn't tell exactly how wide, but it stretched almost from one side of the field to the other. It wasn't perfectly still either. It was drifting, just a little, like it was balancing on air. Not wobbling, just slow but steady movement, like a blimp but smoother, more deliberate. There were three small lights on the underside, one near each point. Dull red, not blinking, not glowing, even. Just present, like LEDs you'd see on standby electronics. I pulled over onto the shoulder and rolled down my window. I was fully expecting to hear something, a hum, a whir, anything. But there was nothing. Absolute silence. No crickets, no wind, not even engine noise from my own car. It felt like the air itself had stopped moving. I sat there maybe 2 or 3 minutes watching. I didn't take my phone out, didn't even think to. I wasn't scared, but I was very aware of how alone I was out there. Eventually, the thing started to rise, very slowly. It didn't rotate or tilt, just lifted straight up, still perfectly level. It went higher until I couldn't see it anymore against the night sky. No flash, no change in those red dots. It just faded upward until it was gone. I waited another minute, then drove the rest of the way home. My house is on a little cul-de-sac in a newer subdivision outside Westport. I didn't tell anyone when I got in, just microwaved some leftover mac and cheese, showered, and went to bed around 2 a.m. I didn't sleep much, not because I was scared, just wired, like my brain wouldn't settle down. The next morning, I woke up around 7:30. I was off that day, but the garbage truck comes early and always wakes up my dog. I got up, fed her, made coffee, and that's when I noticed the car in the driveway. Black sedan. Looked like a government vehicle. Tinted windows, no plates, just sitting there, engine off. 2 men were standing outside it. One was by the front step, the other by the car, both in dark suits, no visible badges or anything. I opened the door a crack and asked if they needed something. The one closest to the house smiled, not wide, just enough to be polite, and said, "Just a few quick questions, ma'am, if you have a minute." I stepped out onto the porch. He didn't offer a name, just asked if I'd been on County Road 700E the previous night, near the collapsed barn. I said I had, on my way home from work. Then he asked, "Did you see anything unusual while driving?" I didn't answer right away. I wasn't sure what to say. He kept looking at me, not in a threatening way, more like he was studying my reaction. I said I'd seen some weird lights in the sky. Just that, nothing else. That's when the second man, still standing by the car, called over. He said, "Do you often imagine things at night?" His tone wasn't sarcastic. If anything, it sounded like a genuine question, like he'd asked it before and gotten serious answers. The other man didn't react. He just kept his eyes on me. I said no. I said I was awake and driving and that I knew what I saw. The one at the car didn't say anything else. The one near me just nodded like that was good enough. It was good enough. Then he looked past me at my front yard and asked if I had any outdoor cameras. I told him no. He said, "Understood," and thanked me for my time. They both got in the car and backed out of the driveway. I watched them go. They didn't stop at any other houses, just turned out of the neighborhood and drove off down the main road. Later that day, I noticed something odd. My mailbox, which is one of those group boxes for the block, had a smear across the front, like oil or ash. Not on anyone else's, just mine. I wiped it off with a paper towel and it left this gray, greasy streak. I thought about keeping the towel, but ended up tossing it. That night, my dog wouldn't go into the backyard. She stood at the door and whined, but when I opened it, she backed away. I ended up walking her out front instead. She kept looking up, not barking, just watching the sky. It's been a few weeks since then. I haven't seen anything else, but every night when I drive home from work, I take a different route. I was out flying my drone that afternoon over the eastern edge of the Yuma Proving Ground. Not over it, exactly. There's a zone around it where hobbyists are told to stay clear, and I always did. I fly for fun, not to cause trouble. I'd parked on a gravel pull-off just off Highway 95 where a lot of people go to watch the sky. Flat desert in every direction. Nothing but low scrub and distant mountains. I'd launched from the bed of my truck around 4:20 p.m. Weather was hot, dry, cloudless, perfect visibility. The drone's a DJI Mavic 3. I've got the Pro model with the better camera. I was planning to film a sunset time-lapse just to mess with some editing software I'd picked up. I'd brought a cooler, headphones, and a book. Wasn't planning to leave until after dark. Everything was normal for the first 30 minutes or so. I was getting some good shots facing west, low golden light over the sand, long shadows. Then, while panning the camera north, I noticed something zip through the corner of the frame. Fast. Just a blur at first. I reversed the footage, played it frame by frame. It moved from one side of the frame to the other in maybe 2 frames. That's about 1/10 of a second. I thought it was a bird maybe, but when I slowed the clip down, it didn't look right. No wings, no shape I could make out. Just this metallic flash like sunlight bouncing off chrome. It didn't curve or wobble like a bird would. It was straight and fast, like too fast. So I adjusted the gimbal and started scanning in that direction. A few seconds later, it happened again, this time in real time. I saw it. Just a thin, dark shape moving across the sky way too fast and way too low for a plane. Completely silent. I tapped record. A few more passes. Each time it zipped by at a slightly different angle, like it was circling or scanning. It didn't look manned. It didn't look built even. Just this shape. Maybe 10 or 15 feet long, no wings, no lights, no contrail. It would appear out of nowhere, shoot past in a straight line, then vanish. And I mean vanish. Not fade out or get smaller in the distance. Just gone. I turned the drone higher, tried to get a top-down view. As soon as I did, the signal cut out. Not dropped, cut. The video feed glitched hard and then went black. Controller said signal lost, but the drone was still in visual line of sight. That's not supposed to happen. I tried the return to home button, nothing. Then the controller itself powered down. I checked the battery, still 74%. I looked up and the drone wasn't there anymore. Gone. Not crashed. I would have heard it. I stood on the tailgate, scanned the whole horizon. Nothing. I just stood there a long time. I didn't even pack up right away. I felt watched. Like I wasn't alone out there anymore, even though I couldn't see anything. I kept expecting headlights to crest the ridge or a low hum to start from somewhere, but the desert stayed quiet. By the time I left, the sun was down. I got home around 8:45. I live in town, on the edge of Yuma. Small house, fenced yard. I backed into the driveway and just sat there with the engine running for a bit. I don't usually get spooked, but something about the silence out there stuck with me. Like something had stopped watching me, but only for a little while. Around 10:30, someone knocked on my door. Not the bell, a knock. 3 slow ones. I wasn't expecting anyone, and my porch light's been busted for months, so I grabbed a flashlight and looked through the peephole. Couldn't see anything. Just dark. I opened the door a few inches. There was a man standing there in a black suit. Plain black tie, white shirt, no jacket. No dust on his shoes, which didn't make sense. My whole walkway's gravel. His hair was slicked back and he looked average. Not old, not young. Could have been 35, could have been 55. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "You misunderstood the sky," he said. "Let's keep it that way." That was it. He didn't introduce himself, didn't ask for anything. Just stood there looking at me like he was waiting for me to nod or agree. I didn't say anything, didn't move. I had one hand on the door, the other on the flashlight, which I hadn't even turned on. He didn't blink. Then he turned and walked down the steps out of the beam from my porch window. I waited. Never heard a car start, never saw taillights. Just silence. I didn't sleep much that night. I kept the lights on in the living room and left the curtains open, checking the street every 10 minutes. Next morning, I went out to my truck. The drone was gone. It had been in a locked hard case under the tonneau cover in the truck bed. No signs of forced entry. The case itself was still there, zipped up. But when I opened it, the drone was gone. Controller too. Just the molded foam insert, sitting empty. I checked the truck interior, the garage, even my office in case I'd brought it in and forgot, but I hadn't. I remember locking it up. I do it every time. I checked the footage from my Ring doorbell, thinking maybe it caught something. But the video froze at 3:12 a.m., then picked back up at 3:45. That's never happened before. I still have the empty case. I thought about filing a report, but what would I say? Someone stole my drone after I saw something weird in the desert, and a man in a suit told me to forget it? I didn't misunderstand what I saw, but I stopped flying for a while after that. I got to the site late. The plan was to camp 3 nights at Ridge Hollow Campground, way up near the Allegheny front. I'd stayed there once before, years ago with friends, but this time I was solo. I needed a break from everything. Phone off, no emails, just trees and quiet. It was mid-October, and most of the leaves were already gone. Cold at night, low 40s maybe, but I had gear for that. The first night was uneventful. I parked in the gravel lot at Site 12, hauled my pack a few hundred yards in, and got the tent up before sundown. There was no one else around that I could tell. No other cars, no fires off in the distance, just wind through the bare trees and the occasional owl. I made ramen on my little camp stove, read a paperback by headlamp, and turned in around 10. Sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up needing to pee. The tent was cold, and I didn't want to unzip unless I had to, but it got uncomfortable fast, so I gave in. The fire had gone out, just a few glowing chunks of charcoal left in the pit. I stepped into my boots and walked a few yards away to take care of things, then got back in the tent. Nothing felt weird then. It was quiet. Next morning, when I unzipped the tent, I saw it. The fire pit had been rearranged. It wasn't the logs or anything. I just had a small fire with a couple sticks and some charcoal. But the rocks, the stones that made up the ring around the pit, they were different. They'd been moved into a perfect circle. And I don't mean someone tried to make a circle. I mean it was perfect. The kind of geometry you don't get without measuring. Uniform gaps, equal spacing, like someone had traced it with a compass. That pit wasn't like that when I went to sleep. I stood there staring for maybe a full minute, trying to talk myself into it being nothing. Maybe I did it and forgot. Maybe I moved the rocks and just didn't remember. But I knew that wasn't right. I never touched them. I had a little folding stove I used inside the ring. I didn't need to. It was early. The sun was barely up. My phone said 6:12 a.m. I checked it out of habit, even though there was no signal up there. I took a photo of the circle, kind of without thinking, just one. Then I boiled water, made coffee, and sat in my camp chair trying not to think about it. Around noon, I packed a small bag and decided to hike south on the red-blazed trail. It loops past a few rock outcrops and climbs to a ridge with a decent view. I'd done it before. It's about 5 miles round trip, not strenuous. Maybe 30 minutes in, I saw him. He was standing just off the trail, not walking, just there, like he'd been waiting. Black pants, black jacket, no name tag. The kind of uniform you see on rent-a-cops or private security. But it was clean, crisp, like he just put it on. He stepped out onto the trail, slow and deliberate, not aggressive, but not casual either. "You camping alone?" he asked. His voice was low and even. Not unfriendly, just flat. I said, "Yeah, Site 12. Mind if I see your camera?" I froze a little at that. I hadn't taken it out since I got there. It was a Canon point and shoot I kept in my pack, mostly for wildlife shots. I hadn't told anyone I brought it, not even mentioned it in the little logbook at the ranger station. "Why?" I asked. He tilted his head slightly, like he didn't understand the question. Then he repeated it. "I'd like to see the camera." I don't know why I gave it to him. I just unzipped the top of my day pack, pulled it out, and handed it over. He didn't even look through the photos. Just held it in his palm, turned it over once, then handed it back. "Please don't take pictures of the fire rings," he said. "That's all." Then he stepped off the trail and vanished into the trees. Not ran, not even walked away, just turned and disappeared down the slope. I stood there for a while, holding the camera, not sure what had just happened. I thought about turning back, but something in me didn't want to walk past that spot again so soon. I finished the hike, didn't take any more pictures. Back at camp that evening, I checked the photo I'd taken. The circle was still there, clear as day. But when I looked again an hour later, it was gone. The thumbnail was black. I tapped it. File corrupted. All the other photos were fine, just that one. I didn't sleep much that night. Nothing else happened, no noises, no people. But I kept waking up thinking I heard footsteps outside the tent, always fading just as I sat up. When I packed up the next morning, the rocks had been moved again, scattered this time. Not back the way they were, not kicked or tossed, just laid out in a weird arc, curving away from the pit like a tail. I left them where they were. I haven't camped alone since. It was mid-September, just starting to cool off at night. I'd taken a week off work to head up to my cousin's place near Lake Vermilion in Minnesota. He had a little fishing cabin he let me use. Nothing fancy, just a one-room shack, a wood stove, and a small dock. No Wi-Fi, no cell service. That was the whole point. I got there late Tuesday afternoon. Took the old aluminum boat out with a six-pack and some tackle, just slow trolling for walleye. Caught a couple smaller ones, tossed them back. By the time it got dark, the lake was dead still. I turned off the little trolling motor and just let the boat drift. No sound but the water tapping against the hull. Around 10:30, I noticed this glow out over the middle of the lake. I thought it was another boat at first, maybe someone with a lantern or one of those big LED rigs. But it wasn't moving like a boat. It was hovering, maybe 40 or 50 feet above the water, just sitting there. A round, pulsing white light. No beam, no flicker, no sound. Just this slow, rhythmic dimming and brightening. I killed the headlamp on my vest and just watched. It didn't move closer or farther, just stayed in the same spot. I remember glancing at my watch, 10:41. I kept checking because I felt like I was losing track of time. At one point, I realized the light had changed from white to kind of a pale orange. Not gradually either, it was just different, like someone flipped a switch. Still no sound. I wanted to record it, but my phone was in the cabin, plugged in. I just sat there, kind of frozen. I don't know how long I watched it, 10 minutes maybe. Then, just like that, it was gone. Not like it flew off. One blink it was there, the next it wasn't. I stayed on the water another half hour, not sure why. I was trying to convince myself it was a drone or some trick of light, but there was no noise, no navigation lights. Nothing you'd expect from something flying that low. I went back to the cabin, locked the door behind me, which I don't usually bother with out there, and laid on the cot with my boots still on. Slept maybe 3 hours. Next morning, I was out on the dock with coffee by 7. Fog had rolled in thick, couldn't see past the first tree line. Around 8, a black SUV pulled down the gravel path. I heard it before I saw it, tires popping over the rocks. It stopped just short of the cabin. 2 men got out, both wearing black suits, no ties. One tall and thin, the other broader, maybe late 50s. They didn't introduce themselves. The older one asked if I'd experienced anything unusual on the lake last night. I laughed a little and said, "Like what?" He smiled, but not in a friendly way. Lights, shapes, electrical problems. I said I didn't know what he meant. He looked at my boat and asked if I had a depth finder. I told him yeah, but it's old, just a basic sonar unit that shows depth and a fish icon if you're lucky. He asked if it had logged anything strange the night before. I told him no, it wasn't even on. I wasn't mapping, just fishing. The tall one never said a word, just walked slowly down the dock, looking out over the water. He had a notepad, but didn't write anything. Then the older guy asked if I'd noticed interference on my phone or radio. I said I didn't have service out here. He nodded like he already knew that. There was a long pause. Then he said, real calm, "Might be a good idea to fish elsewhere for a while." He didn't sound threatening. More like tired. Like he was giving advice that had been given to him. I didn't say anything. They both walked back to the SUV, and I watched them drive off down the road, no plates on the vehicle. Later that day, I tried to check the depth finder's log, even though I'd told them it wasn't on. It's got a tiny SD card in the back that logs sonar history. When I opened it, the card was gone. Not removed. Gone. The slot was empty, but the latch was still locked shut. You can't pull it without unlocking it. I never touched it. I hadn't looked at that thing in months. That night, I packed up and drove back to Duluth, even though I'd planned to stay through the weekend. I didn't feel scared exactly, just off, like I wasn't supposed to be there. I haven't been back to that lake since. I don't know how to start this except to say it happened exactly like this, and I'm still trying to make sense of it. My name's Paul Donovan, I'm 32, and this all went down last fall during a work trip through northern Arizona. I was driving back from a client meeting in Flagstaff late one evening, just me and the road. I left around 8 p.m., planning to spend the night in some motel near the town of Winslow before heading home the next morning. The drive should have taken maybe 2 hours or so. The weather was clear but cold, and the sky was full of stars. I don't usually drive that late, but it was the only way to fit the trip in. I was on Route 66 for a while, then switched to a smaller highway that cuts through the desert and some forest patches. I remember being tired but not sleepy, just that calm kind of tired you get after a long day. What I don't remember is what happened after that. I woke up the next morning in my car. The windows were fogged up, and I was parked on the shoulder of a dusty dirt road. It wasn't the road I'd planned to stop on. There were no streetlights, no signs, just scrub brush and low hills around me. I had my phone, but no signal. I looked at the clock on my dash. It was 5:47 a.m. That didn't make sense. The last thing I remembered was pulling over briefly for gas around 10:30 p.m., somewhere near Flagstaff. That was supposed to be only about 2 hours before, but I had no memory of driving any of that time. No blurry images, no traffic, no towns or gas stations, nothing. Like I'd fallen asleep behind the wheel. But the car was fine, no dents, no scratches, no damage at all. I sat there for a few minutes, trying to shake off the confusion. The air was cold and dry. I was alone. I checked the gas gauge, it was half full. Not empty, but I didn't recall filling it up after Flagstaff. I unlocked my door and stepped out. The desert smelled like sage and cold earth. No animals, no cars, just silence except for a faint wind. I figured I'd better find a way back to a main road before someone noticed my car on this back road. I grabbed my jacket and started walking, hoping for a gas station or some sign of civilization. It took about a mile before I hit a paved road. I followed it east and soon saw the motel sign for Desert Pines Lodge. That's when I realized I was only about 10 miles from Winslow, but in the opposite direction I'd expected to be. I checked my phone again, still no service. I walked up to the motel office. It was open and quiet inside, staffed by a woman who looked like she'd been there all night. I asked if anyone had called for me or if my car was reported anywhere. She shook her head. "No one's been around here since last night," she said. I rented a room and tried to get some rest. The whole thing felt off, like the last few hours had been erased. Around 9 a.m., I was still half awake in my room when someone knocked the door. I wasn't expecting anyone. I peeked through the peephole. There was a man standing there. He wore a black suit and tie with a long black coat over it. His hair was dark, neatly combed. His face was expressionless, and he didn't smile. "You're back early," he said. I froze. Who are you?" I asked. He just looked at me and didn't answer. I cracked the door open a bit, but before I could say anything else, he stepped back. Then somehow he was gone, just vanished. No door opening sound, no footsteps, no car driving away. Nothing. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, thinking maybe I was dreaming or that it was some trick of the light. I locked the door and sat down on the bed. My heart was pounding. I didn't tell anyone about the man, not right away. Who would believe it? But the whole day I kept checking outside, half expecting him to come back. I called my office later that afternoon and told them about the trip and how I'd lost time on the road. They said the client had seen me leave at 8 p.m., but no one had any idea where I was after that. My car was fine and nothing seemed stolen or damaged. When I got home a few days later, I checked the GPS history on my phone. It showed the route from Flagstaff toward Winslow, but with a big gap between 10:30 p.m. and 5:30 a.m. and a weird detour on back roads I didn't remember taking. I asked a mechanic to check my car. They said everything worked fine, no problems with brakes, steering, or engine. I still don't know what happened that night or where I was for those missing hours, and I can't explain the man in black. But every time I'm driving late, especially on quiet back roads, I find myself looking over my shoulder just in case. I don't even know where to start with this. I was out in the backyard one night, just taking pictures of the stars like I usually do. I'm not some big astronomer or anything, just a hobbyist with a decent camera and a cheap tripod. My name's Clara. I live in a small town in northern Vermont, and this was about a year ago, late September. The air was cool, but still had that hint of summer hanging around. I had set up near the edge of my property where the trees thin out and the sky opens wide. It was just past 10 p.m., no moon, really clear night, perfect for star photos. I'd been snapping shots for maybe an hour, focusing on the usual stuff. The Big Dipper, Cassiopeia, that kind of thing. At some point, I noticed this one star up in the east that wasn't like the others. It was blinking, but not like a plane or a satellite. The blink was slow and rhythmic, almost like a signal: on, off, pause, on, off, pause. It caught my attention because none of the other stars were blinking at all, and this wasn't the kind of flicker caused by atmospheric distortion or clouds. I watched it for a while, trying to figure out if it was just some weird optical illusion or maybe a drone with a light, but it stayed perfectly still, and the blinking kept the same rhythm for at least 15 minutes. Then, slowly, it started to descend. It didn't just drop suddenly or streak across the sky like a meteor. It moved downward really slowly, like it was drifting or lowering itself behind the trees. That part got me weirded out. Usually stars don't move like that, right? I kept my camera pointed at it and managed to get some shots. The blinking light got bigger as it came closer to the treetops and then disappeared behind them. I waited another half hour just to see if it would come back, but it didn't. I told my best friend about it the next day, Maggie, and she teased me, said maybe I'd been looking at a blinking airplane light or a satellite. But I knew what I saw. Over the next week, I kept looking up every night around the same time, hoping to see it again. It never showed up. Then one afternoon, about 6 days after that night, I was at the town library sitting in the little reading nook with a stack of astronomy books. The library's quiet, small, a place where you can almost hear the dust settling. I was flipping through a book about constellations when this guy sat down across from me. I didn't hear him approach. He just appeared and sat down, calm, composed, wearing a black jacket and jeans. He looked normal, maybe late 30s, clean cut, but with this serious expression. He said, without looking away from me, "Are you still watching the sky?" I blinked, a little startled. I didn't know what to say, so I just nodded. He smiled briefly, but it wasn't warm or friendly. It was more like he was confirming something. Then he said, "You should be careful what you look for. Some things aren't meant to be found." I tried to ask who he was, what he meant, but before I could get the words out, he stood up, left a small card on the table, and walked away. I looked down at the card. It had a name, E. Cross, and a phone number I didn't recognize, but no company or organization listed. I thought about calling, but something stopped me. Instead, I pocketed the card and left. That night, I went back outside to the same spot in the backyard, waiting for the blinking star or whatever it was to come back. But the sky was just regular stars, no blinking, no movement, just silence. Over the next few days, strange things started happening. My phone would lose signal in random places, even at home where reception is usually fine. Sometimes my camera's battery drained faster than it should, even when I wasn't using it. And I kept feeling like someone was watching me. Not in a paranoid way, but a quiet, constant awareness, like eyes just out of sight. One evening, I was walking home from the grocery store, only a 5-minute walk, and I noticed a car driving slowly past me twice. Nothing strange about that, except it had no visible license plate and the driver's face was obscured by the dark tint. When it passed the second time, I caught the driver glancing directly at me. I quickened my pace and got inside without looking back. I told Maggie about the car, the guy in the library, the blinking star. She suggested I report it to the police, but I felt like that would only make me look crazy. Besides, what could they do? Some guy in a black jacket said some weird stuff and a blinking light moved behind the trees. It sounded ridiculous. One night, I left the back door open a crack while I was inside. I don't usually do that, but it was warm enough. I was working on editing my photos when I heard a low humming noise outside, like a distant engine, but smoother, quieter. It lasted maybe 20 seconds and then faded away. I stepped outside and looked up, but the sky was empty. No blinking light, no strange shapes. The next morning, I woke up and realized my camera was missing from the kitchen table where I'd left it. The back door was closed, but the lock looked intact. I never found the camera. After that, I stopped going outside at night. I stayed in during the evenings and tried to put it all out of my head. But I kept thinking about that blinking star, the slow descent, the man at the library. And sometimes when the wind is just right, I swear I hear that low hum again. I was out in the middle of nowhere again, chasing a story about some weird crop damage in a field just outside of La Mesa, Texas. I'm Sarah Donovan, a journalist who spent way too much time covering rural mysteries, local oddities, stuff that usually ends up forgotten or laughed off. This one started like any other. Farmer calls, weird patterns in his cornfield. Nobody could explain how it happened or why. I figured it'd be some pests or weather, but I wanted to see for myself. The day was hot, typical early summer afternoon. The sky was bright with just a few wispy clouds, and the air smelled like dry grass and dust. I drove my old beat-up pickup down a dirt road until I reached the edge of the field. The corn was mostly healthy, except for one patch maybe 50 feet wide where the stalks were flattened, bent in odd directions. Nothing like usual wind or rain damage. It looked almost deliberate, like someone had walked through and pushed the plants down in a pattern. I spent a couple hours photographing everything, trying to get different angles, close-ups of the stalks, the ground. The soil was hard, cracked in some places, and I noticed a faint smell in the air, kind of metallic, but not quite. I shrugged it off and took some notes. The farmer, a guy named Jim, was nervous but didn't want to say much, just kept repeating, "It's not normal." That night, back at my motel room, I was going over the pictures and notes when my phone rang. It was one of those calls where the number showed up, but there was no one on the other end, just static and some faint clicking sounds. At first, I thought it was a bad connection, but then I started hearing what might have been breathing. Slow, deliberate. It wasn't heavy or ragged, just there, right alongside the clicks. I held the phone up, listening for a good 2 minutes, but nothing else happened. I tried calling back, but it went straight to voicemail. I figured it was a prank, maybe someone messing with me because of the story. But the breathing stayed with me, in the back of my mind. The next morning, I told Jim about the call and he said, "You're not the only one. Some of us been getting those calls lately. No one talks, just that noise. Folks say it's nothing, but it sure feels like something." I left the motel that afternoon and drove back toward town, but the feeling of being watched stuck with me. It was subtle, like a weight on my chest. I kept checking my rearview mirror, expecting to see a car or someone following me, but there was nothing. That evening, as I was unloading my stuff at my apartment back in La Mesa, someone knocked at the door. It was nearly dark, and the sky was a dull orange from the sunset. When I opened it, there was a man standing there, dressed in black from head to toe, jacket, pants, even a cap pulled low over his eyes. He looked like he didn't want to be noticed. He didn't say anything at first, just looked at me for a long moment. Then, very quietly, he said, "Stories can disappear too." I blinked, confused, and before I could ask what he meant, he turned and walked away down the street. No one else was around. I closed the door slowly, locking it behind me. When I looked through the peephole, he was gone. No car, no footprints in the dust. Nothing. After that night, my phone kept ringing. Same silence, clicks, and breathing. I stopped answering. I tried to get back to work, but the crop damage story felt like it was slipping away. My notes started disappearing, not physically, but details I was sure I wrote down just seemed off when I looked again. Some things changed. The photos looked different, like some had shadows or shapes I didn't remember. I told a few people about the calls and the man, but no one else saw or heard anything. I don't know if it was some kind of warning or just a weird coincidence, but something about it made me pull back. I still don't understand what any of it meant. Just that for a while I was caught in something that didn't quite belong here, and it didn't want to be talked about. The night it happened, we were all outside in the backyard, just the four of us. Me, my wife Lisa, and our two kids, Abby and Max. It was one of those late summer evenings in northern Michigan, where the air gets cool but not cold, and the sky is clear enough to see a billion stars if you just look up. We'd been sitting around a small fire pit, roasting marshmallows and talking about nothing in particular. Max was trying to convince Abby that his flashlight could cut through anything, just kid stuff. The whole yard was lit by the fire and some old string lights Lisa had hung up along the deck railing. That's when Abby pointed up, all of a sudden quiet, just staring toward the woods at the edge of our property. "Look," she said, whispering. I followed her gaze and saw three perfect circles of light drifting slowly across the yard. They were about the size of basketballs, maybe a little bigger, and they glowed with this soft, almost oily white light. Not like bulbs or flashlights, more like light without a source, like they were just hanging there in the air. They moved slowly, side by side, no sound, no flicker, just steady and smooth, like they were gliding on invisible rails maybe 2 or 3 feet above the grass. Lisa and I exchanged a glance, then she asked, "Do you see that?" Max was wide-eyed, frozen next to Abby. I tried to keep calm, but honestly, I didn't know what to say. I grabbed my phone, thinking to get a picture, but when I unlocked it and pointed it toward the lights, the screen just went black. No camera, no flashlight, nothing. Like the phone was dead, even though it wasn't. We watched those lights drift slowly toward the tree line and then disappear behind the pines, leaving no sound, no rustling branches, no movement at all. We all just stood there for a minute, not saying much. The fire crackled. Max finally broke the silence with, "What was that?" I didn't answer. Later that night, I kept checking the yard from the kitchen window, but nothing else showed up. The night went back to normal, the usual sounds of crickets, the occasional hoot of an owl. Next morning, Lisa was the first one to notice something strange. "Our neighbor, Mr. Garrison," she said. "He was talking with some guy, wearing a black jacket, black pants, like he was trying to disappear in the morning fog." I'd seen Mr. Garrison a couple of times before, an older guy who kept to himself mostly. Lisa said the man in black didn't stay long, just stood close and spoke quietly for maybe 5 minutes, then got into a dark sedan and drove away. I wanted to ask Mr. Garrison about it when I saw him later that day, but when I brought it up, he just blinked and said, "I didn't talk to anyone." That didn't sit right with me. I mentioned it to Lisa, and she told me she'd noticed something else too. Our mailbox had been opened, even though we always lock it. Inside was a black folder, one of those thin, slick plastic ones with no writing or label. I opened it, expecting to find papers or something, but it was empty. What caught me off guard was how warm it felt, like it'd been sitting in the sun all day, even though it was early morning and still cool outside. I put the folder on the kitchen table, but it didn't cool down for hours. That night, the kids were restless, and Lisa kept glancing out the windows like she expected to see those lights again. I didn't want to bring it up, but the tension was thick. The next few days were uneventful, but we all felt watched. The kind of feeling you get when you realize you're not alone but can't see who else is there. I started hearing noises at odd times. The faintest humming, sometimes right outside the window, but sometimes inside the walls. Not loud enough to be sure, but enough to make me stop and listen. One morning, the black folder was gone. No note, no sign it was taken, just gone. I asked the neighbors if they'd seen anything strange, but no one had. Mr. Garrison kept to himself, eyes darting away when I looked his way. We didn't see the lights again, but that feeling never really left. We went back to our routines, but every now and then, when I'm outside alone, I catch a glimpse of something just beyond the edge of the yard. A flash of white light, a shifting shape between the trees. And every time I wonder if someone's still watching. I was out on the dock of my little cabin on Lake Crescent in Washington, just after sunset. The sky was clearing up after a light rain, and everything smelled like wet pine and earth. I had my phone out, mostly just messing around, trying to catch some shots of the evening light over the water. I like to make these short clips for myself, just quiet nature stuff, no fancy editing or anything. That night, though, I started noticing something odd. At first, it was just little pinpricks of light hovering over the lake's far shore near those steep hills. They weren't like stars or anything natural, more like faint, steady glows that shifted position slowly, like they were moving but not in any obvious pattern. I zoomed in on my phone camera, trying to get a better look. The lights were soft blue and white, kind of dim, but definitely there. One of them blinked off, then reappeared a few seconds later a little higher and closer to the shore. It didn't make any sound, it was just there. I was standing there, feeling more curious than anything. The lake was quiet except for the occasional splash of a fish or the faint rustling of the wind in the trees. Then I noticed a figure on the opposite edge of the dock, near the water's edge, standing completely still. I hadn't heard anything. No footsteps, no voices. The figure was dressed all in black, from head to toe. Not just dark clothes, but like something designed to blend into the night. No hat, no reflective surfaces, just black. I thought maybe it was someone fishing or just wandering, but something felt off. The person didn't move or even shift weight. I raised my voice and called out, "Hey, are you okay?" But there was no reply. I tried again, a little louder this time. "Hello? Do you need help?" The figure slowly turned its head toward me, not in a natural way like it took a moment, almost mechanical. Then it started moving sideways, gliding almost, along the shoreline, never looking away from me. It moved behind a group of trees and vanished. No sound, no breaking branches, nothing. I stood there for a while, phone still out, but by then, the lights on the other side of the lake had all disappeared, like they were never there. I couldn't tell if I'd imagined the whole thing or if it was real. I went back inside the cabin and checked the door locks twice. My phone had no signal, which wasn't unusual out there, but the whole night felt heavy, like something was watching from the dark woods beyond. The next morning I went out for coffee in Port Angeles, and when I came back around noon, there was a black sedan parked by the side of the road near my cabin. It wasn't there the night before, at least I didn't see it. The car was clean, no license plate visible, and the windows were tinted so dark I couldn't see inside. I didn't see anyone around. The car was just sitting there, engine off. I figured maybe it was some local checking out the area, but the road near my cabin is dead-end and rarely used, especially during the week. I walked up to the car slowly, not sure what to expect. As I got closer, the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I swear I caught a glimpse of movement inside the tinted windows, but when I stopped and stared, there was nothing there. I checked the driveway and the surrounding area. No footprints, no other vehicles. The car stayed parked there for the rest of the day. I debated calling the police, but thought they'd probably say it was just a local or a lost traveler. Instead, I stayed inside, windows locked. The whole afternoon, I kept watching the woods, feeling like someone might be out there just beyond my sight. By evening, the sedan was gone, just like the figure from the night before. I don't know what any of it was. I've been back to the cabin a few times since, but I've never seen anything like that again. No lights, no figure, no mysterious car. Still, I keep thinking about how quiet it was that night, and how that figure just watched without saying a word, then disappeared without a sound. We were driving through the Mojave Desert just after sunset, me and my wife Karen. We'd left Vegas that afternoon, heading back to Los Angeles after a long weekend. The sky was still warm, orange fading into purple, but the desert was already cooling fast. It was one of those quiet drives where the radio plays softly and the miles just roll by, nothing much happening. Just the two of us, the empty road, and a whole lot of sky. I was behind the wheel, and Karen was fiddling with the radio, flipping through stations to find something to hold on to. That's when the static started. I noticed it first out the window, a strange light just barely peeking over a low ridge ahead, right near the highway. It looked like a headlamp or maybe a flare, but it wasn't attached to any car or truck. It just rose up slowly like a balloon letting go, then hung there, steady, hovering just above the crest. It wasn't blinking or pulsing like an airplane light, just a solid, soft white glow, perfectly round. I blinked and the light blinked out, gone as if someone flipped a switch. Right at the same moment, the radio went dead on every station. Static filled the car, louder and louder until Karen turned it off altogether. No music, no chatter, nothing. Just that low, crackling noise. We both looked at each other and I asked, "Did you see that?" She nodded, her eyes wide, holding my hand. The road behind us was still clear, no other cars, no flashing lights anywhere. It was just us and that silence. We kept driving for a while in quiet, the radio dead, the desert darkening outside. Then I spotted a rest stop up ahead, a little cluster of lights around gas pumps and a tiny store. I pulled in and killed the engine. The air felt different, thicker, the kind of quiet that isn't peaceful, but empty. Karen and I stepped out, stretching our legs, there's both of us glancing around like we expected to see someone, or something lurking in the shadows. Near the payphones, just by the edge of the parking lot, I saw a man. He was standing perfectly still, wearing a black suit, nothing flashy, just plain and dark. His hair was slicked back and his face was unreadable in the dim light. What caught me was that he wasn't talking on the phone, he wasn't even holding it. Instead, his lips were moving, mouthing a single word, back. I looked away for a moment, then back, and he was still there, watching us. Karen noticed him too and gave me a quick nod, like, "Do you see that?" We got back in the car without saying much and locked the doors. As I backed out, I glanced again at the man. He stayed where he was, never moving from that spot. We drove on, the silence in the car heavier than before. The radio stayed dead for another 10 miles until it suddenly came back to life, static fading, a station humming on the air again. I tried changing channels, but they all worked fine now. Neither of us spoke much the rest of the drive. Karen kept looking in the rearview mirror, and I kept checking the side mirrors, half expecting to see that man following us or that light rising again behind a hill. By the time we hit the city limits, the night had settled fully. The weirdness felt like a bubble about to pop, and I think both of us were glad to be out of that empty desert stretch. When I got home, I checked the news, no reports of power outages, no missing people, nothing unusual. But sometimes when I'm driving late or just sitting on the porch, I think about that light rising behind the hill and the man mouthing the word back at that rest stop. I don't know what it meant. Maybe it was nothing. But it stuck with me, that quiet, watching feeling. I don't bring it up much, but not even with Karen. Some things you just keep to yourself. I was hiking alone on the Pine Ridge Trail up in northern Vermont. It was early October, cool, crisp air with a light fog hanging low between the trees. The kind of morning that makes everything feel quieter, like the forest is holding its breath or something. I'd left the trailhead around 7 a.m., aiming to get some miles in before the sun climbed too high. I'd done this trail a couple times before, but this morning felt different right away. Maybe it was the fog or how still everything was. I didn't hear the usual birds or rustling animals at first, just the crunch of leaves beneath my boots. I was about 2 miles in when I started hearing something behind me. At first, I thought it was just the sound of my own footsteps echoing off the rocks or branches snapping. But then it changed. There was this faint, mechanical clicking, like tiny gears turning or metal tapping. It wasn't natural. I stopped and turned around a few times, but nothing was there. Just empty trail and thick trees. I picked up my pace, trying to ignore it, but the clicking kept up. Not right behind me, but close. It wasn't loud, more like an irregular tapping that came and went, always just out of sight. I scanned the underbrush and looked for any sign of wildlife, but no birds, no squirrels, nothing moving. I told myself it was probably a loose part on my pack or maybe a rock falling. But when I checked my gear, everything was tight. No loose straps or anything that could make a noise like that. I even tried dropping my pack and standing still, listening. The clicking stopped for a moment, then started again, faint but definitely mechanical. The fog was starting to lift as the sun broke through the trees, but that sound didn't go away. I felt a weird pressure, like something was watching me but staying just out of reach. I kept going, but the trail felt longer than usual, the woods thicker. I wanted to turn around but didn't want to admit I was spooked. Eventually, I got back to the trailhead around noon, just as the parking lot was starting to fill with cars. I spotted my old Subaru parked near the entrance, and something caught my eye. A man was standing right by my car. He was wearing a black suit, the kind you see in movies, neat, pressed, no tie. His hair was slicked back, and he had this expressionless face like he wasn't really looking at anything. He wasn't on his phone, not doing anything, just brushing dust off his shoulders. Only there was no dust on his suit. It was too clean, too perfect for the dirt lot. I walked up, keeping my distance. "Hi," I said. He looked at me slowly, then nodded once. "That sound you heard?" he said. "It isn't for you." His voice was calm, low, and the way he said it made me shiver, not from cold. I blinked, ready to ask what he meant, but he didn't wait. He just turned and walked into the trees, disappearing into the fog like he wasn't really there. I stood there, looking after him, wondering if I'd imagined the whole thing. I drove home after that, but every time I reached a stoplight or was alone in a quiet spot, I thought about the clicking, the man, and those woods. I never heard the sound again, and I didn't see the man in black anywhere else. I don't know why that clicking was there or who that guy was. I guess some parts of the trail aren't meant for us, even if we think they are. I was camping alone out near the Sawtooth Mountains in Idaho, trying to get away from everything for a few days. Just me, a small tent, and a couple of books. It was late September, and the nights were already chilly, but the days were still warm enough to sit outside and watch the sunset without a jacket. On the second evening, I was sitting by the fire just after twilight, watching the sky darken and the stars start to come out. I'd already eaten and was just about to pack up the fire when I noticed something weird out beyond the ridge a few hundred yards from my camp. There was this light, a soft, glowing orb, maybe the size of a basketball, just hovering a little above the ground. It wasn't blinking or flashing like a plane or helicopter, and it didn't move in a straight line. It sort of drifted slowly, almost floating in no particular direction. The light was a pale blue-white, almost like moonlight, but more intense, and it didn't cast shadows on anything around it. I kept watching, thinking it might be some kind of drone or a lantern someone had let loose, but then it started moving toward the ridge, slowly at first, then faster, like it was gliding. I could see it disappear behind the trees and the ridge. No sound at all. No engines or buzz, just the quiet of the forest around me. After a minute or so, I got up and started walking back to my tent. That's when I noticed a car parked maybe 50 yards away, just sitting on the edge of the clearing where I'd set up camp. It was black. No logos, no decals, just a clean, dark sedan. The headlights were off, but the engine was idling. You could see the exhaust in the cold air, steady and quiet. I froze for a second, staring at the car. I hadn't heard it arrive. I wasn't expecting anyone, and the nearest road was at least a mile away. I thought about calling out, but something made me stay quiet. The driver's door opened, and a man stepped out. He was wearing a dark suit, buttoned all the way up, with a white shirt and a thin black tie. His hair was neat, and his face was expressionless. He looked me straight in the eye when he came closer, standing maybe 10 feet away. "Some things aren't meant to be found," he said, without any introduction or explanation. I opened my mouth, wanting to ask what he meant, but nothing came out. He nodded once, then walked back to his car, got in, and drove off slowly, the taillights fading into the trees. I stayed there for a long time after he left, watching the place where he disappeared. The forest was still quiet, but the feeling of being watched lingered. I wasn't sure if I should stay or pack up and leave, but I chose to stay the night. Nothing else happened, and in the morning, the clearing looked normal. No footprints besides mine, no sign the car had been there. I packed up and left that day, driving out through the winding mountain roads, thinking about the light, the man, and that strange warning. I don't know what I saw or who that guy was, but something about it all stayed with me on the drive home. I was driving through the Mojave Desert late one night, heading back to LA after visiting a friend in Nevada. It was one of those solo trips where the road feels endless, and the radio eventually fades out because you're so far from any city. I'd been on the road for hours, the air outside dry and cool even though it was summer, and the sky was pitch black except for stars. Somewhere around midnight, about 50 miles from the nearest town, I noticed a faint glow off to the right, above the desert floor but below the stars. At first I thought it might be some kind of flare or a campfire, but it didn't flicker like a flame. It was more like a hovering light, round and steady, maybe the size of a basketball. It glowed with a soft white light that pulsed slowly, almost breathing. I pulled the car over on the shoulder, curious but cautious. The desert was silent except for the hum of my engine cooling down. I stepped out and looked toward the light. It hovered maybe 20 feet off the ground, not moving much, just gently pulsing. There was no sound, no wind, no bugs, nothing, just that orb of light. I wanted to get a better look, but didn't want to get too close. So I stayed near the car, shining my flashlight in its direction. The light from the orb seemed to dim and brighten in response, like it was aware of me. I felt this weird chill, even though it wasn't cold. Then I saw movement near the car, a man walking toward me from the darkness. He was wearing a black suit, perfectly pressed, and a white shirt underneath. No tie. His shoes made no sound on the gravel. I hadn't seen him approach at first, and I didn't hear footsteps. It was just suddenly there. He stopped about 10 feet from me, hands at his sides, eyes locked on mine. His face was pale, expressionless, but somehow serious. The desert around us was still, no breeze, no sound except for our breathing. Without saying a word, he reached into his jacket and pulled out a small folded piece of paper. He handed it to me and said in a calm, quiet voice, "Forget what you saw. Keep driving." Then he turned around and walked back into the darkness, disappearing almost immediately into the night. The orb was gone too, like it had vanished the moment the man appeared. I stood there frozen for a moment, holding the paper. I unfolded it slowly, expecting maybe a note or a warning, but there was nothing written on it. Just a strange symbol, something like a circle with lines radiating unevenly from it, kind of like a broken sun or a cracked compass. It wasn't a language I recognized. I got back in my car, still feeling off, and started driving. The road stretched out in front of me, empty and silent. I glanced at the paper again, but the symbol didn't change or glow or anything. Just a weird, crude drawing on plain paper. For the rest of the trip, I kept thinking about that man and the light. Who was he? Why did he want me to forget? And what did that symbol mean? I never saw the orb again, and I never saw the man in the suit. But sometimes when I'm driving alone at night, I look out into the desert and wonder if that quiet glow is still there somewhere, watching. I was hiking in the Adirondacks one early fall afternoon, trying to squeeze in a day on the trail before the weather turned colder. I'd chosen a spot called Panther Gorge, not because it was popular or anything, but because it was supposed to be quiet, a little remote, and mostly untouched. I'd been hiking alone for a few hours, the sky partly cloudy with that low, gray light that makes everything feel a bit muted. About halfway through the loop, I came to a narrow stretch of woods where the trees thickened and the path narrowed to barely more than a dirt track. The usual sounds of birds or wind in the leaves were gone. Dead silence. It was strange enough to make me stop and listen, but then there was a flash, like a camera or a lightning bug, but brighter, just for a second. The light came from just off the trail, deeper in the woods. I squinted into the shadows but saw nothing. I kept moving, but the silence stuck with me. No crunching leaves underfoot, no birds calling. It was the kind of quiet that makes you hyper-aware of every little sound, and every time I thought I heard something, it vanished. After about 10 minutes, the trail opened up again into a small clearing near the road that led back to the trailhead parking. I was a little on edge by then, wanting to get off the trail before dark, and that's when I saw the car. It was a black sedan, the kind you see in the city, parked right there on the side of the road, engine running but no lights on. I didn't recognize the make, just a plain-looking, older model, no logos or anything. The driver's window was down and a man was sitting inside. He looked normal at first, mid-40s, clean-shaven, dark hair slicked back, wearing a black suit and white shirt with the collar open, no tie. His expression was calm, almost unreadable, but he looked right at me. I slowed down, not sure what to expect. "You okay?" he asked, voice low but clear. "Yeah, just finished the hike," I said, but my voice sounded weird in the still air. He nodded. "The forest keeps its secrets. Respect them." I stared at him, not sure how to respond. There was something about the way he said it, like it wasn't just a casual warning, but a statement with weight. "Do you mean the light? The silence back there?" I asked, gesturing vaguely toward the trees. He shook his head slowly. "Not everything is meant to be understood. Sometimes the best thing is to walk away." I wanted to ask more, but the words caught in my throat. Before I could say anything else, he closed the window, started the engine, and the car pulled away slowly, then turned onto the road and disappeared around a bend. I stood there for a while, looking after it, feeling the cold start to creep into my bones as the sun dipped lower. The silence in the woods was still with me when I got back to my car. I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever was back there, whatever that flash was, it wasn't just natural. I drove home that night thinking about the man, the car, and the strange quiet. Nothing about it made sense, but part of me didn't want to figure it out either. I was driving my rig south on Highway 89 somewhere between Flagstaff and Prescott, just after midnight. The highway was quiet, no other trucks around for miles, and the sky was clear, the kind of dry, cool desert night you don't get much in July. I had a long haul that week, so I was running late and trying to make good time. The desert out there can get eerie at night, but I've driven these roads for over 20 years, so I wasn't exactly on edge or anything. Around 1:30 a.m., just past a stretch where the road cuts through a sparse pine forest, I noticed something odd up ahead. At first, it looked like a hovering helicopter or a police chopper with the searchlight sweeping over the trees, but the light was too steady, too white, and there was no sound. I slowed down and squinted, trying to make out what it was. The light was coming from an object maybe 100 feet above the ground, hovering just off the side of the road. It was roughly circular, but the edges were fuzzy, like it was glowing softly rather than being a solid thing. No blinking lights or usual aircraft signals, just a calm, white glow. It didn't move, except for this gentle pulsating, almost like it was breathing. The sky behind it was perfectly clear, no clouds or haze, so it stood out sharp against the stars. I stopped the truck on the shoulder, killed the engine, and grabbed my phone to take a picture, but when I unlocked it and turned on the camera, the screen flickered weirdly, then went black for a second. I tried again, same thing. Frustrated, I put the phone down and just stared. After a few minutes, the lights started to fade slowly, like someone was turning down a dimmer switch. Then, just as suddenly as it appeared, it vanished completely. The silence was thick. No hum from an engine, no buzzing or any other sound I could identify. Just the usual desert night noises, distant coyotes, wind brushing through the trees. My heart was beating a little faster than usual, but I wasn't panicking. More confused, really. I figured I must have been seeing something weird, maybe a trick of light or some military test I didn't know about. I started the engine back up, pulled back onto the highway, and was about to get going when headlights flashed in my rearview mirror. A car was pulling up behind me fast and then slowing abruptly to a stop, maybe 20 feet back. It was an old black sedan, the kind you see in movies. No visible plates, tinted windows. Nothing about it felt right. The driver rolled down the passenger window, but I couldn't see his face clearly. His voice was calm but firm. "You didn't see anything," he said. I blinked. "What?" "Keep your eyes on the road," he repeated. I glanced around. The forest was dark and still, and the highway stretched empty behind the car. I felt my stomach tighten. "Who are you?" I asked. "No one you need to worry about," he said. His eyes were steady on me through the window, but his expression was unreadable. Then, before I could say another word, the sedan peeled away, tires barely making a sound, and disappeared into the night like it had never been there. I looked back in my mirror, but the road was empty. No lights, no taillights fading into the distance, just the desert and the stars. I tried to get back into the rhythm of driving, but I kept glancing in the mirror, half expecting to see the black car again. The rest of the trip was uneventful, but I felt watched, like something was lingering just beyond sight. When I finally pulled into the truck stop in Prescott a few hours later, I checked my phone again. The pictures I'd tried to take were gone. Not just missing from the camera roll, they'd been wiped clean, like the files were deleted at the source. I hadn't touched the phone since then. I told a couple of other drivers what I'd seen, but mostly got shrugged off or jokes. Maybe they think I'm making it up, or maybe they just don't want to get involved. I still don't know what the light was, or who that guy in the black car really was. The whole thing feels like one of those things you're not supposed to talk about, but it happened, and it stuck with me. I've driven that highway hundreds of times before, but since that night, something's different. Like the road isn't just asphalt and dirt anymore. There's something watching, something waiting. I haven't been back out that way since. Not alone, anyway. I was out in my backyard late one night, just like I often do, trying to get a few decent shots of the night sky. I'm not a professional by any stretch, just someone who's always loved looking up, figuring out the constellations, playing around with my camera. That night, the air was still, cool but not cold, with a thin layer of fog settling in after a light rain earlier. Perfect for stargazing, or so I thought. I'd set up near the edge of the yard, pointing my camera toward a cluster of stars I'd read about a few weeks back. I was just snapping away, adjusting the focus and aperture when something weird caught my eye. One of the stars in that cluster blinked out, not like it faded gradually or got covered by a cloud, just blinked, like a light bulb switching off. I figured maybe it was my eyes playing tricks on me, so I kept watching. Then another star blinked out, and another, right in sequence. Each went dark one after the other, like they were disappearing from the sky entirely. It was slow, almost like a pattern, but I couldn't tell what it meant or if it meant anything at all. The whole cluster dimmed out until only one or two stars were left. I was frozen, staring, trying to convince myself I was imagining it. I looked around my yard for a moment. No planes, no drones, no flashes from neighbors. Just the quiet night and the fading stars. Then, after a minute, the stars blinked back on, exactly in reverse order, like someone had switched them off and then switched them back on. The whole thing took maybe 5 minutes, but it felt much longer. I didn't know what to think. My hands were shaking a little, but I took a few more photos before packing up and heading inside. I told myself it was some weird atmospheric thing, or maybe a glitch with my eyes, or maybe even something with the camera. The next morning, I went to the cafe where I work, not a big place, just a local spot I've been at for a couple of years, working mornings mostly. When I walked in, 2 men were sitting quietly at a corner table. They didn't look like tourists or regular customers. Both were wearing black suits, the kind you don't see much around here. One had sunglasses on, even though the sun was barely up and the cafe was dim inside. They didn't order anything or look away from me the entire time I was behind the counter. It felt like they were waiting for something or someone. I tried not to let it get to me, but I kept stealing glances their way. After a while, I walked over and asked if they wanted coffee or anything. The one without sunglasses looked up, gave me a faint, tight smile, and said, "Just keeping watch." No further explanation, just those words, quiet and calm. I nodded, said, "Okay," and went back to work. They didn't say a word after that. Throughout the day, they stayed, watching. No phones out, no reading, just sitting and looking. I tried to act normal, but it felt like the walls were closing in. When my shift ended, they left without a word, slipping out the door like they'd never been there. I kept thinking about that night sky and those blinking stars, and then those men watching me like I was the only thing that mattered in the room. I don't know if they were connected or if I was just imagining things getting weird all at once. Since then, I've tried to avoid going outside at night to look at the stars. The sky feels different now, empty, like something's missing or watching back. I've checked my photos and videos from that night a dozen times. The stars blinked for real, but no one else saw it. No one I told believed me. And the men, I haven't seen them again. But sometimes when I'm at the cafe early, I catch a glimpse of a black suit in the window reflection or feel like I'm being watched, even when it's empty. I don't have answers, just a feeling that some things aren't meant to be seen, and some people make sure of that. I went camping alone in the Cascade Mountains just a few weeks ago. I'd been hiking a lot that summer, mostly solo trips, trying to clear my head and get some time away from work and city noise. This time, I picked a spot near a small lake a few miles off the main trail, well away from any other campers. I didn't check in with the ranger station or anything. I usually don't. I like the quiet, the isolation. I set up my tent in the late afternoon, just before the sun started to dip behind the trees. The air was cool, but still held that late summer warmth, the kind that feels soft but never hot. After dinner, I settled in for the night, lying back on my sleeping pad with my headlamp off, staring at the faint glow of stars peeking through the gaps in the pine canopy. Somewhere around midnight, I woke up. At first, I thought it was an animal, maybe a raccoon or a deer, but then I noticed the footsteps. They weren't random or hurried like an animal running. These were slow, measured, almost deliberate steps. They sounded like they were circling my tent, starting just to the right side, moving around to the back, then to the left and back again. I froze, listening. The steps repeated, circling slowly, sometimes stopping just outside the tent fabric. I couldn't see anything in the dark. My flashlight was inside the tent and I didn't want to unzip and risk whatever it was being scared off. The sound was soft but clear, almost like someone was pacing, watching, maybe trying to decide something. I stayed perfectly still for maybe 20 minutes, hoping it would go away, but it kept circling. At some point, the footsteps stopped, and for a moment, everything was dead silent. No wind, no wildlife noises, just a heavy quiet that pressed against the tent walls. I didn't dare move. Eventually, the footsteps started again, slower now until they faded off into the trees. I tried to fall back asleep, but the tension stayed with me. I spent the rest of the night on edge, hearing the forest settle but not feeling the usual comfort I get from being surrounded by trees. The next morning, I packed up early and headed back to the trailhead. I figured I'd check in with the ranger station just to let someone know I was out and safe. When I got there, the ranger station was empty except for a man sitting in a chair by the door. He was wearing a black suit, the kind of suit you don't expect to see at a ranger station in the middle of the mountains. He looked up as I approached. "Are you Emily Parker?" he asked. I was surprised. I'd never given my full name to anyone on this trip, and I didn't check in. "Yeah," I said cautiously. "Who's asking?" He smiled faintly but didn't answer directly. Instead, he said, "You should move on." Before I could ask what he meant, he stood up and walked inside the station. When I looked back, the chair he'd been sitting in was empty. I blinked and then checked around the building, but there was no sign of him. I don't know what to make of it. The footsteps, the man in black. It didn't feel threatening exactly, but there was definitely something off, something I can't explain. I left the mountains that day feeling watched, like the woods themselves were warning me to go. Since then, I haven't been back there, and if I ever do, I'll probably check in first. I was out in the mountains near Bend, Oregon, one late summer evening, just after sunset. I'd gone hiking earlier in the day and decided to stick around until dark, hoping to catch some shots of the stars or maybe some weird light reflections off the peaks. The sky was clear, a little chilly once the sun dropped, and there was a faint smell of pine and dry grass. I had my camera with me, nothing fancy, just a decent DSLR and a tripod. Around 9, while I was fiddling with my camera settings near a small clearing, I noticed something strange. A cluster of lights far off on the ridge, moving in a pattern I couldn't immediately figure out. They weren't blinking like airplanes, and they definitely weren't the kind of steady light you get from a tower or campfire. They moved in a smooth, slow sequence, almost like a pulse or wave. I started recording, thinking maybe it was some kind of drone formation or a weird signal reflection. The lights moved rhythmically, left to right, up and down, but there was no sound, no other activity around them. I kept filming for a while, trying to zoom in, but the distance made it hard to see any details beyond the lights themselves. The pattern didn't seem random, it was too deliberate. After maybe 10 minutes, I heard footsteps behind me. I turned around pretty quickly, half expecting maybe another hiker, but there were 2 men standing there. Both were dressed in black suits, the kind you'd expect from security or government officials. But this was way out in the woods, miles from any road or building. Neither said anything at first, just stood there watching me. One finally spoke in a calm voice. "Can we see your footage?" I hesitated, but handed over the camera. They crouched down to look at the screen. The other man pulled out a phone and took a video of the footage, like they were copying it or cataloging it. I asked who they were, what they wanted, but they didn't answer directly. After watching the video a few times, the one who seemed to be in charge looked up at me and said, "This is not your story to tell." I was about to ask what that meant when they stood up, nodded at each other, and walked away into the trees, disappearing almost like shadows. I was left standing there, camera still in hand, feeling a weight I can't explain. When I got home and tried to review the footage, The video files on my camera were corrupted. The files would open for a second, then freeze or show static. I ran every recovery tool I could find, but the footage was gone. Nothing I did could bring it back. I've tried to tell friends what happened, but without the footage, it sounds like I'm making it up or that I just saw some weird lights in the distance. But the memory is real. Those lights, the men in black, their calm warning. Since then, I've stayed away from the mountains at night. Every time I look up at the sky near that ridge, I wonder if those lights will come back. But I don't think I'm supposed to find out. I woke up with a start, the hum of highway traffic droning in my ears, but everything else felt fuzzy. My head was pounding, like I'd been hit with a hammer. I blinked against the bright sun slicing through the windshield and realized I was sitting in the driver's seat of my car, parked awkwardly on the shoulder of a 2-lane highway somewhere in northern Oregon. The weird part? I had zero idea how I'd gotten there. I tried to piece it together. The last thing I remembered was grabbing a coffee at a gas station about an hour ago. After that, everything was a blank. No memory of driving, no idea why I'd pulled over. I grabbed my phone to check the time and GPS, but the screen was cracked and dead. Not great. I tried the ignition. The car started right up, no problem. I figured I'd just pull back on the road and head home. Then, out of nowhere, a black sedan slowly pulled up behind me. It wasn't some beat-up old car either. It looked like it had just come off a showroom floor, shiny and spotless. The windows were tinted so dark I couldn't see inside. The sedan eased to a stop, blocking my way. I looked over my shoulder, confused, and the window on the driver's side rolled down. A man in a black suit leaned out just enough for me to see his face. He was in his late 30s or early 40s, clean-shaven with perfectly combed dark hair. His expression was calm, but unreadable. "Not yet," he said, his voice low and smooth. "Excuse me?" I said, my throat dry. "You shouldn't be driving right now." He didn't smile or soften his tone, but there was something about the way he said it that made me hesitate. I looked around. We were parked on the shoulder of a quiet stretch of highway. No other cars were nearby. I felt off, more than just the headache, like I was stuck in some weird pause. "Look, I don't know who you are, but I need to get going," I said, trying to sound firmer than I felt. He shook his head. "Sit tight. Someone will come for you soon." Before I could ask what he meant, the door of the sedan opened and another man stepped out. Same style, black suit, dark hair, serious face. He didn't say anything, just walked up to my car and looked in. I locked the doors without thinking. My heart was hammering now. The first guy looked at me and said, "You saw something you shouldn't have. That's why you're here." I opened my mouth to argue, but I didn't have any answers. All I could think was, what had I seen? I racked my brain, but nothing came up except that strange gap in my memory. "Look," I said finally, "I don't know what you think I saw. I don't even remember half of today." The second man stepped closer, his face blank but intense. "That will change. We'll help you remember. Just relax." I wanted to slam the gas, get the hell out of there, but my body wouldn't cooperate. There was this pressure in my chest, like the air around me had thickened. The guys in black didn't move or threaten me, but their presence was heavy, like being weighed down. Then the first man pulled out a small notebook and started writing. After a few seconds, he showed it to me. It said, "Where were you around 10 p.m. last night?" I frowned. "I was at home." He nodded slowly, then looked at his partner and back at me. "And yet, you were seen, somewhere you didn't belong." "What are you talking about?" I asked, my voice shaking. The second man suddenly took a step back, pulled something from his coat pocket. It was a small silver badge, no words or logos, just a plain metal rectangle. "You're going to want to cooperate." I swallowed hard and kept my eyes on them. This was insane. Why were they here? Who were they? For a moment, the highway seemed to stretch forever, silent except for the distant hum of cars. The sun was hotter now and sweat started dripping down my neck. "Why are you here?" I asked again. "What do you want from me?" The first man smiled then, real, but just the tiniest edge of it, "To make sure you stay quiet." I could feel my hands trembling. "About what?" He closed the notebook and nodded at his partner, who went back to the car. The first guy stayed, watching me. You'll remember soon enough, he said. Then the black sedan started moving again, slowly backing up before speeding off, leaving me alone on the shoulder. The quiet returned, but now the air felt different, heavier, like something unseen was lingering. I sat there for a long time before starting the car again. I drove the rest of the way home in silence, glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting the black sedan to appear again. At home, I checked the clock. It was 3 p.m. That meant there was this huge chunk of last night I had no memory of, and somehow that tied to those men in black. I never called the cops. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't even try to explain it because there was no explanation that made sense. All I knew was that I'd been watched, maybe controlled, and that whatever had happened wasn't over. The weirdest part? After that day, every so often, I'd catch a flash of a black car just out of sight, always when I was alone, always for just a second. And I don't think they're done with me yet. It was late October, a Thursday, and I was driving home from work through the outskirts of New Richmond, Wisconsin. The sky was mostly clear, but there was a cool, damp feeling in the air, like the kind of chill that clings to your skin when the sun's just dipped below the horizon and the night is starting to settle in. I was a few miles past the local power plant, the large coal-fired one that everyone in town jokes about but relies on, when I noticed something off. I'd been on that stretch of road 100 times before, usually quiet and uneventful. That evening, though, just after 7 p.m., I spotted some odd lights hovering over the power plant. They weren't the usual work lights or warning beacons on the towers. These lights were smaller, brighter, and arranged in a pattern that didn't make sense for normal equipment. They moved slowly, but deliberately, like they were surveying or scanning the facility. I pulled over to the side of the road, curious but cautious. I kept my headlights off and rolled down my window a crack so I could listen. The air smelled faintly of ozone and burning coal, but mixed with that was something metallic, sharp and unfamiliar. The lights blinked intermittently, not like an emergency or warning, but more like a coded signal, or maybe a sequence. I reached for my phone, thinking of snapping a quick picture, but the screen was glitching, flickering on and off. I kept it off after that. I just sat there, watching as the lights shifted slowly along the perimeter of the plant, then disappeared behind one of the cooling towers. That's when I heard a car pull up behind me. I glanced in the rearview mirror, but didn't see headlights, just a dark shape. The engine was quiet. The driver's side window rolled down, and a man's face appeared. He was clean-shaven, mid-40s, with slick-back black hair and a dark suit that didn't quite fit with the kind of guys I'm used to seeing around town. No badge, no identification, just a stiff smile. "Evening," he said. His voice was calm, measured, with no trace of friendliness or threat, just something cold and professional. I was already on edge, but tried to stay composed. "Evening." "Do you work at the power plant?" he asked. "No, I'm just passing through. I work downtown, over on Main Street." He nodded like that made sense. Then another car pulled up quietly behind his. The passenger door opened, and a second man stepped out. He was similar, black suit, clean-shaven, pale, with a face that looked like it hadn't seen sunlight in a while. The first man leaned closer to my window. "You said you were driving past. What time exactly did you see the lights?" "About 7:10. I was just heading home from work. They were hovering over the northern cooling towers." "Did they stay there long?" "Maybe 5 minutes. Then they moved off behind the towers and disappeared." The second man stepped forward now, folding his hands calmly in front of him. "Did you see any people around? Workers, maintenance crews?" "No, it was quiet. I didn't see anyone except those lights." There was a silence, like they were processing what I said. Then the first man said, "Do you mind if we take a look at your phone?" I shook my head. "I'd rather not." He didn't press it, which made me more uneasy. "All right, look, I don't know what those lights were, but it wasn't normal. I'm just a local. I was curious." The second man nodded slowly. "We understand. It's important that no one else talks about this. The company is already aware and handling it." I blinked. "The company?" "Yes, the power plant's management. They requested discretion." That's when the first man pulled something out of his jacket pocket, a small badge. It wasn't a police badge, more like a government ID, but the details were blurred in the dim light, and I didn't get a good look. "Thank you for your cooperation," he said, voice flat, "and your discretion." Then both men got back into their cars, which had no license plates I could see, and drove off. The second car pulled ahead and disappeared first. The first car followed, and then the road was quiet again. I sat there a minute longer, trying to shake off the creeping feeling that I'd just been watched in a way I didn't want to be. When I finally got back on the road, the power plant was dark again, just the usual orange glow from the towers. No lights, no movement. The next morning, I told my boyfriend Mark about what I saw and the two men. He was skeptical, naturally. "Maybe some government agents or company security," he said. "Probably just making sure you don't spread rumors." But I wasn't so sure. Over the next few days, I kept catching weird things. My phone acted up, cutting out calls and messages without explanation. Once, while driving past the plant in daylight, I saw a black SUV parked near the gate. The windows were tinted so dark it looked like a black hole. No one got out, and the driver's seat was empty. A few nights later, I thought I heard footsteps outside my apartment window around 2 a.m. When I looked, there was no one there, but the streetlight flickered strangely, and the air smelled metallic again. I started avoiding that stretch of road after work, taking a longer route even though it added 20 minutes to my commute. I didn't want to see those lights again, or the men in black. Weeks went by with nothing unusual until one evening I was working late at the office. It was nearly 10 p.m., and the building was empty, except for me. I glanced out the window and thought I saw a dark figure standing across the street in the shadows of a street lamp. But when I looked again, nothing was there. I keep thinking about those lights, the men, and that badge I never got a proper look at. It all feels like part of something bigger I'm not supposed to know about. But I also know I'm probably just an ordinary person who stumbled onto something strange one night, and that maybe it's better left alone. I still drive past the plant sometimes, but I don't stop, and I never mention what I saw to anyone else. I was out on the trail by myself that weekend, hiking in the northern Adirondacks. It was late September, and the weather had turned cool but clear. Perfect for hiking, if you ask me. The leaves were just starting to change, and the air had that crisp smell of pine and wet earth. I'd planned a 2-day trip, camping near a little abandoned cabin I'd heard about from some local hikers. It wasn't on any official maps, but I found it marked in an old guidebook I picked up in a dusty outdoor shop in Saranac Lake. I got to the spot mid-afternoon, around 3 p.m., and the cabin was exactly as described. Small, weathered, with broken windows and a sagging porch. The place looked like nobody had been there for decades. I set up my tent a little ways off, near a cluster of fir trees, and settled in to explore the area a bit. I was alone and enjoying the silence, except for the usual forest sounds, bird calls, the wind in the branches. That evening, after dinner, and just as the sun was dipping low, I decided to walk back toward the cabin. It was about 7 p.m., twilight, and the sky was fading into deep blue. That's when I saw it, a glowing orb hovering maybe 30 yards from the cabin, just above the ground. It was round, pure white, but not harsh, more like it was softly lit from inside, glowing gently. It didn't flicker or move much, just hung there, floating maybe 2 feet off the ground. I stopped dead in my tracks. My first thought was that maybe it was some kind of lantern or campfire someone had left behind, but there was no smoke, no heat, no sound. The light was too steady and clean. I didn't hear any voices or footsteps around either. The forest was quiet in a way that felt different, like everything had hushed. I stood there watching the orb for maybe 5 minutes. Then it started moving slowly toward the cabin. It glided just above the ground, steady and silent. When it reached the porch, it hovered for a moment near the broken window, and then suddenly it vanished. Just like that. Gone. That night, I barely slept. I kept thinking about the orb, and I swear I could hear a faint humming noise every now and then. Not loud, just this soft, vibrating sound that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. I packed up early the next morning and headed down the trail. About halfway back to my car, which was parked at the trailhead, I saw a man standing near the edge of the forest. He was wearing a black suit, the kind you'd expect for a funeral or a formal business meeting, except was way out in the middle of nowhere. His hair was dark and slicked back, and his expression was flat but focused. I slowed down and he called out, "Hey!" I stopped. "Hi!" He took a few steps closer but kept a distance. "You've been dreaming," he said, almost like a statement, not a question. I blinked. "What?" "The things you saw last night. The light. The cabin." He glanced over his shoulder toward the trees. "That wasn't real. You should leave before nightfall. Don't come back." I looked at him, confused and a little annoyed. "I'm pretty sure what I saw was real. I'm not making it up." He smiled, but it was cold, like it didn't reach his eyes. "Dreams can feel real sometimes, but this is different. You shouldn't be here." I wanted to ask who he was, why he was dressed like that, but something about him made me hold back. His voice was low but steady, and he had this way of making you feel like arguing was pointless. "Look, I'm just hiking," I said. "I'm not hurting anything." "That's not the point." He paused, then added, "Thank you for your discretion." Then he turned and walked back toward the trees, disappearing quickly into the forest shadows. I didn't see him again after that, but the feeling that something was watching me didn't leave for a long time. The next few days, I kept looking over my shoulder whenever I was alone. And sometimes, out in the quiet of the woods, I thought I could see a faint light flickering just beyond the trees. I didn't go back to that part of the trail, and I haven't told many people about it. It's just one of those things that happened and didn't make sense. But it did, somehow, and I guess I'm still trying to figure out what. I was working the late shift at the old radio tower on the edge of Millbrook, a small town upstate New York. It was early November, and the night had settled in heavy and quiet, with a cold fog rolling in from the river just a mile away. The tower itself wasn't much, just a rusty metal structure with a cramped room at the top where I managed local emergency broadcasts and kept the signal running for a handful of small communities nearby. That night started like any other. I got to the tower around 9 p.m., grabbed my jacket, and climbed the spiral staircase to the broadcast room. The fog had thickened since dusk, and the windows were already streaked with condensation. The silence was absolute, except for the soft hum of the equipment and the occasional beep or click from the transmitter. Around midnight, I was going through the usual checks when the radio started to crackle with static. At first, it was normal, just interference from the weather or a weak signal from a distant station. But then the static got louder, like someone was trying to push through with a signal of their own. It wasn't any kind of code or message I recognized, just this low, drawn-out hiss that didn't belong. I adjusted the dials, trying to clear it, but the static stayed, filling the room with this eerie white noise. It was different from the usual interference, almost like it had intention behind it. I leaned closer to the microphone and stopped transmitting, thinking maybe I could hear it better without my voice cutting through. That's when I saw him. Outside the window, just past the fog, standing on the metal catwalk wrapping the tower, was a man, dressed in black from head to toe. Not the usual workman's gear or casual jacket you'd expect in this cold. No, this guy was wearing a suit, a black suit and a tie. His hair was slicked back, and his face was pale, almost too smooth in the dim light. He didn't move like a normal person, though. He stood still, almost statuesque, except for one thing. His hand was raised, palm facing me, this slow, clear gesture to stop what I was doing. I blinked, and for a second, I thought maybe I was imagining it. The fog was thick, the room was dim, and the static was still there, filling every corner of the space. But when I looked again, he was still there, unmoving, silently watching. His eyes were fixed on me, though I couldn't tell if they were dark or reflecting the faint glow from the control panel inside. My first instinct was to reach for the radio and start transmitting again, maybe call out to him, but the static rose up suddenly, cutting off my voice in a harsh burst. It sounded like interference, but it was almost like the radio itself was warning me, drowning out my words with this overwhelming hiss. I pulled back from the microphone and grabbed my jacket, my heart pounding. I watched him for a moment longer, and then, just as suddenly as he appeared, the man turned and stepped off the catwalk into the fog. The mist swallowed him whole, and he was gone. I sat there for a long time, listening to the static, the silence, the faint hum of the tower's machinery. The radio never cleared up completely. When the morning shift showed up, I told them about the static and the figure outside, but no one really believed me. They said it was probably just fatigue or the fog playing tricks. But that night was only the start. Over the next few days, my phone started acting weird. Calls wouldn't go through, texts sent themselves blank, and sometimes my screen would flicker, showing flashes of static even when the phone was off. I'd catch myself glancing over my shoulder, feeling like someone was watching me whenever I was outside or driving home in the dark. A few nights later, I was walking to my car in the parking lot behind the tower when I noticed a black sedan parked near the edge where the lot met the woods. It was the kind of car you don't see around here. Too clean, too polished, and out of place next to the pickup trucks and older sedans most folks drove. I thought about ignoring it, but then I saw two men step out, both wearing dark suits similar to the man on the tower. They moved calmly, almost like they were on a mission, but not in a hurry. One of them looked directly at me as I approached and gave a small nod. I stopped, feeling a cold knot in my stomach. "You need to be careful what you say," one of them said, voice low and serious. "Some things are better left alone." Before I could answer, they got back into the car and drove off, leaving me standing there in the cold, fog swirling around my feet. After that, the static got worse. My broadcasts would cut in and out, and sometimes, just when I was about to sign off, I thought I heard faint whispers through the radio. Nothing I could make out clearly, but it was enough to make me pause. I kept thinking about that man outside the window, the way he moved, and the warning. I never saw him or the two men again, but their presence lingered. Every time I climbed up that tower, I felt like I was being watched, like the fog itself was waiting for something. Eventually, the static faded and the broadcasts returned to normal, but the feeling didn't go away. Sometimes, late at night, when the wind is just right and the fog rolls in thick, I swear I can hear that same hiss creeping back through the radio, soft and steady, like a warning from somewhere just beyond the trees. I was parked at this truck stop just off Interstate 40 in New Mexico, somewhere between Albuquerque and Gallup. It was early morning, around 4:30 a.m., the kind of time when the sky is just starting to get light, but everything still feels wrapped in quiet. I'd pulled over to grab a coffee and maybe rest for a bit before hitting the road again. The parking lot was mostly empty, except for a few trucks scattered around, and the convenience store was still closed. I stepped out of my rig and stretched, glancing up at the sky. It was clear, maybe a little colder than usual for that time of year. The stars were still out, but I noticed something odd almost right away. There was this low, fast-moving light slicing across the horizon, moving way too quick for any plane I'd seen. I'm used to watching the sky a lot on these drives, and I've seen planes, helicopters, satellites, all kinds of stuff, but this didn't fit any of that. It was traveling maybe a few hundred feet off the ground and fast, much faster than any small plane. It didn't make any noise either, no engine hum, nothing. It just moved in a smooth, straight line and then disappeared behind a ridge to the west. I rubbed my eyes, thinking maybe I was tired or it was a trick of the light, but then I saw it again. This time it blinked once, a quick flash, like a reflection or maybe a signal, and then it was gone. No trail, no sound, nothing. I stood there for a while, just staring where it had vanished. Something about the way it moved didn't sit right with me. I got back in my truck, still thinking about what I'd just seen, and finally decided to grab that coffee. The store opened around 5 a.m., and when I walked in, it was already getting brighter outside. That's when I noticed him. A guy sitting near the back, dressed in a black suit. Not your usual truck stop customer. No hat, no boots, just this plain black suit, buttoned up, and a white shirt underneath. He looked kind of out of place with his polished shoes and tidy hair. He was older, maybe in his late 50s, but his face was clean-shaven, and there was something about the way he sat that made me uneasy. I ordered my coffee and tried to ignore him, But when I headed to the tables to eat, he was suddenly right there, standing beside me. "Quite a night for watching the skies," he said. His voice was calm, but had this low, controlled tone that made me sit up a little straighter. I blinked, caught off guard. "Yeah, saw something out there. Low, fast, no sound. Didn't look like any plane." He nodded slowly, like he already knew. "Not many people notice. Most just assume it's a trick of the light or some military test. But sometimes it's something else." I looked around the store, making sure no one else was paying attention. "What do you mean?" He leaned in just a bit, like he was sharing a secret. "Sometimes it's better not to tell anyone." I wasn't sure if he was joking or serious. "Why's that?" "Because some things are complicated," he said, eyes scanning the ceiling like he was weighing his words carefully. "Not everything people see is meant to be explained. Not every sighting leads anywhere good." I took a sip of my coffee, trying to stay calm. "You know a lot about this, huh?" He smiled, but it wasn't friendly. "You could say that. I'm here to help people understand when to speak up and when to stay quiet." I frowned. "Who are you exactly?" He glanced toward the door, then back at me. "Just someone who's seen too much." Before I could say anything else, he reached into his jacket and pulled out a business card. It was blank, except for a phone number and the name Mr. Gray. "Call if you have questions," he said, then turned and walked out like he didn't want to stick around. I watched him go, feeling a knot in my stomach. The whole thing didn't make any sense. Why would some guy in a suit show up at a random truck stop and warn me to keep quiet? And what exactly was that thing I saw in the sky? The next day I told a friend from the road about it, and he laughed it off, said I was probably just seeing a drone or some military plane testing. But I know what I saw, and I know it wasn't normal. I haven't called the number. I don't think I want to know more. Sometimes, like that guy said, it's better not to tell anyone. But the image of that silent, fast light still lingers whenever I'm driving through those empty stretches of desert sky. I was out hiking alone in the San Gabriel Mountains, just north of Los Angeles, late one spring afternoon. It was the kind of day where the air was warm but still crisp, and the sky was mostly clear except for some wispy clouds near the horizon. I had started around 3 p.m., figuring I'd get a few hours before sunset to explore a trail I hadn't been on before, somewhere between Eaton Canyon and Mount Wilson. Nothing fancy, just a solo day out to clear my head. The hike was peaceful. There were only a handful of people on the trail, and most of them turned back early. I went deeper, past the main junction, heading toward a ridge that gave a good view of the valley below. Around 5:30, I stopped at a clearing, took a drink of water, and noticed something strange just off to the east. At first, I thought it was a helicopter hovering in the distance, maybe a news chopper or something, but it wasn't moving like any helicopter I've ever seen. It was a smooth, metallic shape, kind of oval, but with no visible wings or rotors. It hovered silently, no sound at all, maybe a few hundred feet above the treetops, just over the ridge. The sun was low, so the object caught the light in a weird way. It shimmered like metal brushed with oil or mercury. I fumbled to get my phone out and snapped a couple of pictures, zooming in as best I could. Then it vanished. No whoosh, no noise, just blinked out like someone turned off a lamp. I scanned the ridge where it had been, but there was nothing. No aircraft in sight, no drone, nothing. I was honestly kind of frozen for a moment, feeling that weird mix of excitement and disbelief. I looked around to see if anyone else noticed, but I was alone in that spot. After a minute, I packed up and started hiking back down, my mind racing, but my legs moving on autopilot. When I got back to the trailhead parking lot, maybe around 6:45, just as the sun was starting to dip, there were 2 men standing near my car. They looked out of place, like they didn't belong in hiking boots and backpacks. Both wore black suits, black ties, and plain white dress shirts. Their hair was neat, almost too perfect, like they just stepped out of a suit ad. One of them had sharp features, almost gaunt, and the other was shorter, stockier, with dark glasses even though the sun was low. They didn't introduce themselves. One just asked, "Did you take any photos today?" I hesitated, glancing back at my phone on the passenger seat. "Yeah," I said. "I got a couple of pictures of something weird I saw up near the ridge." The taller man's expression didn't change, but his eyes narrowed slightly. "We need you to delete those photos for everyone's safety." I blinked, caught off guard. "Why? What's going on?" "No reason for you to know," the shorter man said flatly. "It's best if you forget what you saw and don't share anything." I felt my stomach tighten. I don't think that's something I can just do. They looked at each other briefly, then back at me. The taller one leaned in just a little, speaking softly but with clear authority. "We're not asking for a favor. We're telling you. Delete the photos, don't talk about it, and move on." I swallowed hard, looking at their serious faces and then over at my phone. I felt like I was in some kind of bad movie. "I'm not comfortable with that," I said, stepping back. "Is this some kind of joke?" They didn't laugh. The shorter one reached into his jacket and pulled out a small, black device, something I couldn't quite make out. "We don't want to escalate this," he said. "You cooperate and nothing happens." I held up my hands. "Look, I don't want trouble. I'm just a hiker." They stared at me a moment longer, then the taller one nodded to the other. They turned and walked to a dark sedan parked a few spaces away. The engine started, and they pulled out slowly, then sped off down the road. I stood there for a long time after they left, heart pounding, hands shaking slightly. I opened my phone, looked at the photos again. They weren't great, just blurry shots of that metallic shape against the sky, but they were real. I thought about deleting them, about wiping everything, but part of me didn't want to forget. It felt like whatever that thing was and whoever those men were, I'd stumbled into something I wasn't supposed to see. That night, I barely slept. The whole thing felt like a half-remembered dream, but the photos were on my phone, and the memory was sharp. I checked the news for anything about unusual sightings. Nothing. No missing persons, no accidents, no government statements. The next day, I drove back up to the trailhead, hoping to find something. Maybe another sign, a clue. The parking lot was empty except for my car. No black suits, no sedan. I hiked a little ways up the trail, but the ridge was quiet, normal. No lights, no metallic shapes. I told a few close friends about the encounter with the men, but not the object. No one really believed me, and I didn't push it. I didn't want the photos online or anywhere else. Weeks later, sometimes when I'm alone, I think about those two men, how calmly and quietly they told me to delete the photos for everyone's safety. It's strange how normal their presence was, how confident, like they were used to it, used to people seeing things they shouldn't. I never saw them again. The photos stayed on my phone for a while, but eventually I did delete them. Not because I wanted to, but because I felt it was safer that way. Still, every now and then when I'm out hiking or just looking up at the sky, I wonder if they're watching, making sure I'm keeping quiet. Or if the thing I saw is still out there, hiding just beyond the ridge, waiting for the next person to notice. I was out by Lake Pendorale in northern Idaho, just past dusk on a chilly spring evening. I hadn't planned to be there long, just wanted to unwind after work and maybe get some shots of the stars or something. The weather was clear, but crisp, the kind of cold that makes your breath visible if you stop moving. I parked on the gravel road that leads down to a small public fishing spot. It's a quiet place, not a ton of people come around that late, especially on a weekday. I grabbed my phone and my camera, figuring I'd try to catch some long exposure shots of the water and sky. The lake's surface was mostly still, reflecting the stars perfectly. About an hour in, I noticed some faint lights flickering just above the tree line on the far side of the lake. They weren't like plane lights, too scattered and irregular to be aircraft. At first, I thought it might be a campfire, but the colors kept shifting. Red, green, pale blue, almost like those LED party lights, but without any pattern. I started recording video on my phone, zooming in to get a better look. The lights moved slowly like they were floating just above the trees, but the way they moved didn't make sense. Not quite like anything natural or man-made I'd seen before. They blinked on and off at times, then faded to almost nothing, only to reappear a little further over. I was thinking maybe it was a drone or some kind of light show from a private boat, but no sound carried over the water, and the pattern felt too deliberate. I kept filming for about 10 minutes before the lights vanished completely, slipping behind a thick cluster of firs. I sat back on a rock and scrolled through the video to check it. Everything looked grainy, but the lights were definitely there. Uneven, shifting colors, moving strangely. I thought about sending it to a few friends who are into this kind of stuff, but the signal was spotty out there and my phone kept freezing on me when I tried to open the video again. That's when things started getting weird. At first, it was little things. The screen would glitch, flickering and distorting colors, apps crashing out of nowhere. I rebooted the phone twice, but it didn't help. Then the GPS stopped working. I was still connected to cellular data, but the maps wouldn't locate me. I figured I might have caught a bad spot or a glitch, so I packed up and started heading back to my truck. The forest was quiet, maybe too quiet. Usually I'd hear some night birds or distant cars on the highway, but there was nothing but the crunch of my boots on pine needles. When I got back to the parking lot, two men were standing near my truck. Both dressed in black suits, no ties, plain black shoes, and wearing dark sunglasses even though the sun had set. One was taller, with thinning hair combed straight back, and the other had a square jaw and a kind of impassive expression. They didn't say hi or anything, they just looked at me. "Are you the one who took the videos near the lake?" the taller man asked, voice calm but firm. I blinked, surprised. "Yeah, that was me. How do you know?" He gave a small nod. "We're here about the device you used." I looked at my phone, as now acting strange again. "It's been glitching since I left the water." The second man stepped forward. "There's a technical issue. We need to take it and make some checks." I hesitated. "Why? What kind of issue?" "Something on the device could cause problems if left unchecked," the first man said. "For everyone's safety, it's best if we have it." I glanced around, my stomach tightening. "I don't think I'm comfortable handing it over." The tall man's gaze didn't waver. "We're not asking, just give us the phone." I felt my heart speed up, but tried to keep steady. "Look, I don't know who you are, but I'm not giving you my phone. You can see the video. You can verify it yourself." He shook his head slowly. "That won't be necessary. We'll send it back once it's fixed. You won't notice anything afterward." "Why should I trust you?" I said, taking a step back. The man with the square jaw suddenly pulled out a small black case from his coat pocket and opened it, revealing a few plain electronic gadgets I didn't recognize. "It's a simple procedure." I looked at them both and realized how out of place they were. Two strangers showing up out of nowhere, dressed like that, demanding my phone after I recorded something odd. Nothing felt right. "I'm sorry," I said, moving toward my truck. "I have to get going." The taller man's voice dropped a bit. "You don't understand. Sometimes things like this don't end well if mishandled." I ignored the warning and got in my truck. As I started the engine, I glanced back to see them standing there, motionless, staring at me. On the drive home, my phone's screen flickered occasionally, then went completely black. I tried turning it on multiple times, but nothing happened. When I got inside later that night, I plugged it in, hoping for a charge, but the phone wouldn't respond. I thought maybe it was just dead, but weirdly, other electronics around the house, my laptop, the Wi-Fi router, started acting up too. Lights dimmed briefly, the router dropped signal once or twice. Nothing major, but odd enough to notice. The next day, I got a call from an unknown number. I almost didn't answer it, but something made me pick up. "Mr. Harper?" a low, clipped voice said. "We're calling regarding your device." I sat down, unsure if I should hang up. "Who is this?" "You'll be contacted soon. Please cooperate." Then the line went dead. I tried calling back, but got nothing. After that, the glitches stopped. My phone finally powered on, but all the video files I recorded that night were gone. Even the ones I had saved from before the strange lights, like someone had wiped them clean. I never heard from the men in black again. The whole thing still bugs me. Why those lights, why the phone acting up, and why they were so interested in a simple video from a quiet lake. It's one of those things that feels half real, half like a bad dream you can't shake. But I know what I saw. We were driving through northern Vermont late April on one of those stretches where the road cuts through dense forest and barely anything else. My wife, Jess, was behind the wheel, and I was navigating from the passenger seat. It was just after sunset, and the sky was the kind of deep blue that's almost black, but still holds on to some fading light. The air was cold, damp from an earlier rain that had left the roads slick, and a low fog was starting to creep in along the edges of the trees. We'd been on the road for hours, taking our time to get out of the city and reach this cabin we'd rented up near Lake Champlain. The trip was supposed to be relaxing. No plans, just us, the woods, and maybe some hiking. Neither of us really talked much during this part of the drive, just enjoying the quiet and the rhythmic hum of the tires on wet asphalt. About 20 miles before our turnoff, we hit a small rest area on the right side. Nothing fancy, just a patch of gravel with a few picnic tables and a couple of trash bins. We didn't plan to stop, but as we passed, I caught something out of the corner of my eye. A dark sedan parked oddly under the flickering orange light of a single lamppost. It was facing the wrong way, angled toward the forest, like whoever had parked it wasn't planning on staying long, or maybe wanted to watch something. I pointed it out to Jess. "Hey, look at that car. Doesn't seem right, does it?" She glanced over. "Yeah, that's weird. Should we pull in? Maybe someone needs help?" I shrugged. "I don't know. It's kind of late." As we slowed down, the driver's door opened. A man stepped out. He was wearing a dark suit, black tie, white shirt, the whole thing, and his hair was slicked back neatly. He looked older, maybe mid-50s, pale complexion, but his face was hard to read. Not angry, not friendly, just kind of serious. He didn't wave or call out. Instead, he stood for a second in the dim light, staring straight at us. Jess slowed the car to almost a stop. "You okay?" she asked softly. The man didn't say anything at first. Then he took a slow step toward the road, and his eyes locked onto ours. "Turn back," he said. His voice was low and steady, like he was telling us a fact rather than asking. "Turn back before it's too late." I blinked. The words caught me off guard, like some part of me expected a different kind of greeting or explanation. Jess looked at me, confused, and then back at the man. "What do you mean?" I asked, but the man didn't answer. Instead, he took a step back toward the shadows lining the edge of the rest area, and just like that, he seemed to fade into the darkness. Not like he ran or walked away quickly, more like the light around him dimmed, and his figure blended into the night until he was gone. We sat there for a long moment. Jess reached over and locked the doors, her eyes wide. "Did he just disappear?" she whispered. I wanted to tell her I didn't see it that way, that maybe he just walked into the trees or around a corner. But honestly, I wasn't sure what I saw either. We pulled back onto the road, the car feeling heavier somehow. The rest of the drive was tense. Jess kept glancing in the rearview mirror, and I kept scanning the road behind us, half expecting to see that same black sedan tailing us, but there was nothing. When we finally got to the cabin, the normal sounds of the forest, wind rustling through the pines, birds settling down for the night, felt different, thicker, more watching. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the man and that weird warning. I checked my phone, hoping maybe I'd captured something on video, but the battery was dead. I was sure I'd charged it before we left. The next morning, I went back to the rest area, hoping to find some sign of the man or the car. The gravel spot was empty except for some tire tracks leading off toward the forest. Nothing else unusual, no footprints or anything. I took a few photos with my phone anyway, even though the fog was thick and the morning light weak. That afternoon, Jess mentioned she had a strange dream. Something about walking down a road and hearing a voice telling her to stop, but no one was there. She said the feeling stuck with her all day. Over the next 2 days, small, weird things kept happening. My phone would flicker with static, then go dead randomly, like before. Jess's watch stopped working, though it was fully charged. The cabin's power flickered a few times, even though the weather was clear. We decided to leave a day early. Driving back, neither of us said much. I kept looking in the side mirrors, half expecting to see that black sedan again, or that man's face watching us from the woods. But nothing showed up. Now, whenever I think about that night, the whole thing feels like a half-remembered dream or a trick of the light. But the weird glitches with our devices, Jess's dream, and that voice warning us to turn back, those things stick in my mind. I'm still not sure what we ran into, or what it wanted, but after that night, something about the forest seemed different.